The sun lay heavy over the sanded yard, a white coin hammered onto the blue cloth of the sky until it hummed. Heat trembled from the packed earth, making wavering mirages of the watching faces. Golden helms, silk veils, common straw hats, all smudged and molten at their edges. Oberyn Martell felt it on his shoulders and in the hollows of his spine, a weight that wanted to press him down, to fix him like another shadow on the ground. He let it pass through him, the way he had learned to let many things pass through him. The ache of long rides, the pricks of desert thorns, the old voices of grief. The spear in his hands flexed like a living thing when he rolled it, the long ash haft warm to the touch and faintly sticky where the lacquer met his palm. The blade was a petal of polished steel, narrow and keen, and beneath that beauty lingered the darker bloom concealed in the grooves upon the steel. The smell of it was faint as a dream, bitter herbs, a resin that remembered night gardens and the hands of apothecaries. He did not need to smell it to know. He had watched the paste turn the color of dried blood as it dried. Across the ring, Sir Gregor Clegane stood like a wall planted by an angry god. His armor stacked plates of blackened steel upon steel, until he seemed less a man than a siege engine forged to walk. A helm with a brutal snout masked most of his face, but Oberyn had glimpsed the man beneath. The scar-scalloped cheek, the piggish eyes that drifted before fixing, the lips too soft for such a ruin of flesh. The mountain made slow, exploratory motions with his longsword, and even those idle arcs drew breezes that lifted dust. He had crushed horses beneath his weight, men beneath horses, castles beneath men. He had crushed Elia. The crowd made a soft animal sound, the collective breath of King's Landing, greasy with the scent of tallow and river rot, and the voice of the herald swelled within it and broke like spray. Somewhere above, the royal box gleamed in a frame of carved stone. Oberyn did not look that way. He knew where the king sat, and where the queen leaned, and where the hand's pale gaze counted men and outcomes. He knew where Tyrion Lannister watched, small in shackles on the edge of his own unmaking. He felt the man's attention like a thin, bright wire against his skin. "Begin," cried the voice that had been born of bells and politics. The small folk's murmur grew teeth. Oberyn let his body lose its straightness and become a line slung between 2 points, 1 foot beneath him, one sliding back, spear angled like a snake that has found a coil it likes. The first step forward was barely a step at all, a testing lean that brought him inside the edge of the mountain's reach and then away. Steel hissed where the sword cut air, startling pigeons on the parapet into a flutter that fell like gray confetti. "You raped her," Oberyn said. The words were not for Sir Gregor. They were for the sun, for the stones, for the blood that had been spilled where the sun and the stones could see. His voice was bright in the heat. "Sure, you murdered her. You killed her children. Men." Sir Gregor advanced with something like patience, which in a man of that size was more terrifying than haste. He did not answer. The blade came from high, a swift, ugly chop that aimed to batter the spear aside and lay a length of steel into flesh. Oberyn's world narrowed to silver and shadow. He felt the air move, a coolness across his brow as if a mother had pressed a damp cloth there, and stepped sideways, letting the sword find earth. The ground shook. Dust leapt. "Elia of Dorne," Oberyn said, and now he did speak to Gregor, because names have weight, and so does truth. He tested the spear's length, kissed the rim of the mountain's vision with the point. "Say her name." The next exchange was closer, too close. He let it be so, because too much space invited arrogance, and he was sick of that. 1 cut, 2. Sir Gregor's sword was heavy and fast, and did not care if it met steel or wood or bone. Oberyn met it with the spear haft twice near his hands, and once nearer the blade, feeling the jar ring up his arms, an iron bell rung in his bones. His wrists remained soft. Soft wrists. Hard fingers. The spear told him where it wanted to go. If only he listened. Space opened briefly as Gregor reset his stance. Oberyn touched the spear's point to the seam at the gorget and danced away before the reply could bite. "You raped her," he said, and his own breath lay warm in his throat, sweet with the syrup Ilaria had given him in the morning to ease the lungs. He saw Ilaria in the front of his mind as clearly as if she stood at the edge of the ring, hands like two shells clasped against her lips, wide mouth taut. She had not asked him not to do this. She had asked him to come back. "You murdered her. You killed her children." None. Sir Gregor did not slow, but he tilted his head a fraction as if the words were gnats. That was something. Not much. A gnat is still a gnat. But the sun makes a man thirst, and the smallest fly can set madness buzzing in the skull. He came on, and the crowd's noise broke into cries and laughter, shifting pockets of courage that never managed to become a tide. Oberyn loosed the first true strike with an exhale, the way a man lets go of an old letter he has read too many times. The spear traveled low and fast and stopped, a hawk breaking an inch from a rabbit's eye. The hawk's shadow passed over the rabbit darted, and in that motion the spear curved and flicked, point run along the seam of Gregor's cuisses, seeking the thinness in the joint inside the knee. Steel to steel made a squeal thief bitter and rust sour. He did not fight the recoil, but let it send him back into the cool seam between two columns of heat. Gregor's sword swept out like a gate, and a chip of the spear's haft leapt away. Wood shivered, but did not break. The second cut came from low, and climbed like something grown at night, a vine intent on strangling a poplar. Oberyn let his left hand release and then catch again, rolling the shaft over his palm, feeling the smooth bite of lacquer that kept it from slipping. He moved the spear as if it were part of his spine. "Say her name," he told the man who had never said anything worth hearing in his life. He could taste iron at the back of his tongue, a phantom of blood. He wondered if the mountain could taste it yet. The paste was already in Gregor's blood. Oberyn had made certain to score the inside of the calf with the lightest of touches 2 exchanges before. So light a child could have borne it without crying. With a lesser man that would already have been enough. Not with this one. Not with this. The mountain's breath was the rasp of bellows. He had not slowed, but a wrongness had crept into his incline. A petulant cant of weight that betrayed the care of a man nursing a tooth that aches. He did not know yet where the ache lay, only that the world had placed a stone in his boot. He came forward to crush the stone and found it under his foot again, and again. The sword fell from a steeper angle now. The next strike tore a groove in the arena's packed sand deep enough to swallow a snake. The crowd's noise swelled, a foam-edged thing, and broke. Oberyn drew away to the ring's left and let his eyes rest on Tyrion for the length of a heartbeat. The dwarf sat rigid, the chain at his wrist dull with grime, his face unreadable to anyone who did not value faces. Oberyn valued faces. He had learned as a boy to read lips across distance in the water gardens. He had learned as a man to read marrow through skin. What he saw on Tyrion's face now was not hope or despair, but a careful emptiness, a vessel ready to receive what was poured. If the world gave him wine, he would drink wine. If the world gave him poison, he would find a cup for that too. Oberyn envied him his cup. "You raped her," he said again, not to forget. Because forgetting is a way rancor rots into an old meal in the gut, but to keep the edge from turning inward. He turned the spear to his right hand and tested a false weakness, letting the point tremble as if his grip had gone. Sir Gregor lunged to punish it. Oberyn sprang left. The spear point slid along the inside of the elbow seam in the mountain's right arm, tugging like a lover at a sleeve. The black paste left its faint, invisible kiss. The mountain bellowed like a furnace as the spear came free. He swung so wide that a man of fewer steps would have died laughing, cut in half while he grinned at the opening. But Oberyn was a river reed, and the wind passes reeds. The sword's arc made a square of shade that slid and vanished, and Oberyn was already elsewhere, eyes full of light. "Say her name." "Shut your whore mouth," came the first words the mountain had spent, like coins shaken out of a slit purse. The voice was muffled by his helm and full of meat. It pleased Oberyn to have it. Any man who speaks has made a wound in his stillness. He will bleed from it, even if the blood is only heat. The fight could have ended as so many end. One slip, one miracle. But Oberyn Martell had never been faithful to miracles. He had tutored himself out of belief. Instead, he believed in numbers. 1 touch. 2. Tanto. 3. He counted them with the bones of his feet, stepping lightly from place to place as if he danced a map only he could see. A point to the inside of the thigh above the greave, narrow and mean, more caress than cut. A needle touch to the leather-padded armpit. He watched carefully for the way the mountain's breath changed. First merely fury, then something with a hitch in it, a snag like a torn nail catching cloth. He had to give him no moment to seize the shape of it. Men who understood their own death sometimes leapt further into it with a kind of joy. He did not want joy. He wanted heaviness. He wanted the great body to betray the small mind within it, as it had once betrayed the only things that had mattered. Above, the hand did not move. Oberyn could feel Tywin's stillness like a board laid across his shoulders. He did not look there. He could smell Illyria's lemon oil, even over the hot iron stink, because that smell lived in his head and needed no air. He could hear Elias laugh, thin as a bell struck by a child too small to lift the hammer. If he looked up, he would see a silk handkerchief twisted between a woman's fingers. He did not want to see the handkerchief now. He had work to do. The mountain came like weather. That part never changed. A crack of steel, a roar. Oberyn parried, let his shoulders roll, his elbows swallow shock, his hands obey the spear rather than the spear obey his hands. On the 5th exchange he allowed himself to press, to sting rather than only to tease. A thrust left of the groin seam met steel. He rolled the haft, and the butt of the spear took Sir Gregor's knee with a sound like a mason's hammer worrying stubborn mortar. The mountain staggered with all the reluctance of a sun tilting toward the west. "Say her name," Oberyn said again, softer now, as if coaxing a child to sound out letters. "Iliadat. Ilia Martell, Princess of Dorne." Horror, the mountain said. If the poison had found his tongue, it did not show there. But Oberyn thought he heard the faintest thickness in the way the word dragged his mouth. He wondered if the big man understood that he had been stung. He hoped he did not. Understanding breeds counter. Let him think he was the only man in the ring, and all else were flies. Let him swing at flies while his own arm turned to wax in the sun. The next minute was not blood or thunder. The next minute was wood and breath and mathematics. He made a circle of the ring, stepping across his own footprints, marking them with the heel to mislead. He let the spear whisper against steel, and when it whispered, he listened like a priest to an oracle. He said Elias' name until her name filled his mouth with something like water, and he let that water cool him. He waited. The poison waited also. It was patient and had no pride. The mountain was pride wrapped in iron. Pride has no patience. He lunged when he should have herded. He chopped when he should have thrust. He began to give himself to his weapon rather than demand that it serve him. And when a man puts himself into his weapon, he must follow where it falls. "Confess," Oberyn said. And now he let his voice carry, so that the stands took the word and made it a bird that flapped from tongue to tongue. He heard it repeat 100 times in 100 mouths. "Confess, confess, confess. Tell them what you did in my sister's chambers on the day your lions kicked down her door." The mountain came forward in a staggering gallop that made the ground jump and the nobles' cups tremble. For the first time, Oberyn felt something that was not art. He felt a boy's fear of avalanche. The giant sword chopped down. Oberyn let the spear catch it, and in the catch he remembered water again. The force of a stream that will snap a log if you brace against it like a fool. He went with it. He went all the way with it, and rolled. And the sword bit earth like a plow and overbalanced its master further than even a mountain should go. Oberyn's feet knew the place his hands had drawn him before his eyes did. He rose like a jackal out of dust. The spear's point found the little strip between gorget and helm at the back of the neck where sweat collects and men scratch without thinking. The point went in as if the world had been only waiting for this. He drove it until the ash haft bent. He drove it until his right shoulder cried. He drove it until his mind filled with white. The mountain made a sound that was not a roar. It was a child's baffled cry. His fingers opened, and the sword went a little way, and then stopped because his gauntlet caught on its own guard. He put a hand up, clumsy as a drunk looking for his hat. Oberyn stepped back, tore the spear free with a hard wrench. Blood came then, at last. A lake where until now he'd had only trickles. It was darker than he liked, with a shine like oil. He moved at once. He could not afford victory's stupid pause. He had paid for that once, years ago, when some lordling's brother had spit at him, and he had laughed, and the brother's knife had found a rib. He had remembered the lesson, and he had folded it into the way he moved. Now he circled to the mountain's front, noted how the man's knees bent without purpose, how his helm snouted uselessly this way and that, as if to smell the enemy he could not see. Oberyn raised the spear and took the eye. It was not chivalrous. It was not a song. It was a quick, true thing, and the scream that broke from the helm's slit was human where nothing that had come before had been. He took the other eye in the next heartbeat, with a little twist that made the point slide through bone the way a needle slides through silk. Steel arms fumbled at air. The huge body shuddered, tried to find its weight again, and for a moment it looked as if it might. Men like this could live a long time by dint of being too stubborn to collapse. Then all at once he sat. He did it with a thud like a door falling from its hinges. His hands went to his face. He cannot pull the spear from his skull, Oberyn thought, calm as a ledger. He cannot mend his neck. He cannot undo what is in his blood. Gregor Clegane, he said, and now he said it very low, because this was a thing for the two of them. Say her name and say what you did. A silence flowed across the yard that was not the silence of heat or waiting. It was the kind that follows the crack when a table splits and all the cups stop moving. The small folk held their breath. The high seats leaned forward until their jewels creaked. Even the flies seemed to hover without buzzing. The man in the helm made a thin sound, a mewl. His great hands pawed at the ruined fronts of his eyes, and the gesture was so obscene in its helplessness that Oberyn had to look away, toward the dull silver of Tyrion's chain. I did, Gregor said at last, because the little mind within him did not understand that it might choose silence. The voice sludged under the helm, thick as gruel. I killed the babes, the girl. The last words were gummed together with blood he had finally begun to swallow. Torre. Whose orders? Oberyn asked, and his voice cracked on the last word. A crack like a knuckles pop, but he had told himself he would not. He had heard his own lie and trimmed it to usefulness. He could not prevent this fissure now. Say whose orders? Gregor made a grinding, uncertain sound. The paste had found his heart. Oberyn could feel the way life stepped back inside the other man's body. But within that ebb, he felt another tide, one pulled by a moon that had shone over rooftops in the far reaches of the city on the day Elia died. Orders. The word wanted a port. It went to the harbor that had fed it all its life. The Lannister, Gregor said, and a red thread of spittle swung from the mouth slot of his helm and trembled. Lion, the old lion. He coughed then, a hard rending thing, and something in him let go. His hands dropped. The shoulders that had buried axes trembled in a small, embarrassed way, as if they regretted their own size. His head angled, and he became a mountain, only in name. The yard remained still for the space of 3 heartbeats. Then heated speech limbed itself and leapt. The sound that rose was not joy, not quite horror. It was confusion with knives. Men looked with glossy eyes up to the royal box, to the place where Tywin Lannister's face was carved from something that had never been alive. He did not move. His posture suggested the faintest tilt of the head, as if a man had strained to hear his name called from a far room. Beside him, Queen Cersei's fingers whitened against the carved thwart of her chair's arm. Across from her, Margaery Tyrell's small smile had subsided. The girl had a gift for letting her features be all promise when seen from a distance, and all caution when seen up close. Tyrion Lannister bent forward and shut his eyes. Oberyn realized only then that he had been breathing shallowly. He let breath fill him again and banished the small dizzy lights at the corners of his sight. The spear's shaft had a smear of blood just below the blade. He used a square of linen from his belt to wipe it, methodical as a groom by a stable door. Prince Oberyn, A herald cried finally, in a voice that wobbled and kept its dignity anyway. "Has prevailed. The gods have spoken." "The imp?" A flurried whisper corrected the boy's next word, and he swallowed. "Lord Tyrion Lannister is innocent of the king's murder." The small folks' noise broke again. And this time there was laughter in it. Laughter that had teeth but also mouths. Some wept. Others jeered. Oberyn did not listen. He felt the tug of the world on his skin, the pull that comes after a choice, when everything that was balanced on a knife edge falls and chooses one side or another, and all the pebbles clatter down the hill. He listened to that, and he listened to his own heart, and he kept listening until he was sure he could step without stumbling. Elaria stood when he came to the rail. In her face lay love and a shadow like the underleaf of lemon trees. She did not speak. He took her hand. The bunch at his own throat ached with the words he would not spend here, as cheap as flowers thrown into a crowd. He lifted her fingers to his mouth, and then let them go, because the moment required a prince and not a lover. He climbed from the sanded yard as the body of Sir Gregor slumped forward with a sound like a sack of ruined fruit. Qyburn, that half-monk, watched it with bright curiosity. Pycelle waddled backward, wobbling jowls and mutters about gods. When Oberyn passed beneath the royal box, he did not bow. Instead he stopped and raised his face and found Tywin Lannister's gaze. He had expected stone. He found glass, inflexible, hard but clear. The hand was a man who had looked at many things and had never seen his own death. Oberyn granted him no words. He let the looking be the weapon. Then he moved on, and the crowd sealed behind him like morning water closing over a frog's step. Tyrion met him in the passage where the heat became a different heat. The fermenting heat of 1,000 men pressed into a palace that had been built to be cool. The dwarf's chains were gone from his wrist already. Some small court rat had scuttled and delivered keys the instant the herald said innocent. Not from courage but the old, lively fear that those who do not follow the gods' verdicts often find themselves on spits. Tyrion's hair lay limp and oily on his brow. His eyes were pale stones in the wall of his face. "You have an inconvenient sense of timing," he said, voice husky. "I had already thought of several valiant final words. Now I must save them for the next time." "If you are a Lannister, there will always be a next time," Oberyn said. The spear across his back felt suddenly heavy. He leaned it against the wall, and for the first time since the sun's coin had baked the yard into trembling, he allowed himself to stand in the shade and be no more than a man. "You saved my life," Tyrion said. He seemed to be testing the words for texture. "You also killed a monster who has stood on my chest since I was a boy. Those are two gifts. I am the sort who likes to repay debts. Unfortunately, the currency on hand is cynicism and wine. I have more of both than I need," Oberyn said. "What I require is attention and patience, and not too many fools in my way." "We are in King's Landing," Tyrion said, spreading his hands. "It is a paradise for fools. They grow them in the gutters like mushrooms. Then we will pick them and fry them in butter," Oberyn said. And Elaria laughed softly behind him, shock making it a small, unready sound. He felt the tremor in her and placed his hand at the hollow of her back, his thumb finding its old place there. "Prince," came Sir Meryn Trant's iron-heavy voice, and Oberyn fought the urge to roll the word prince in something sharp. Trant's visor was up, and his little mouth twitched as if tasting a spice. "His grace commands you to attend the throne. And you, Lord Tyrion. The king will see justice done." "Justice has been done," Tyrion said, and Oberyn felt the hum of something like dark humor in him. "Ask the corpse if you doubt it." "The king will speak," Sir Meryn said. He looked up and to the left, the way a man does when he has been told his next words and cannot find them. "The king will speak." "We will attend," Oberyn said, because a prince can pick which fights he has appetite for. He took up the spear and let its shaft anchor him again. As he followed the king's guard, Tyrion fell into step at his side, and they became a strange pair. The tall serpent and the small lion, both walking toward a cage that had been gilded by too many hands. The throne room had been built to make men feel small. It was very good at its task. It took even Tywin Lannister's measure and shaved a pinch from it. The Iron Throne glared like a sickness in light, that leaned through high windows, all broken edges and bad dreams cast into a bad shape. It had been made from the swords of the conquered. Oberyn wondered how many men had died of infection from cuts inflicted by the chair meant to hold a king. He wondered if the throne took joy in those small stealthy victories, blade by blade. The boy upon it looked at once like a child dressed in a costume for a harvest pageant, and like an old woman's memory of a cruel pet. Tommen's feet did not reach the step below. His crown sat carefully on hair brushed to maternal perfection. Cersei stood 2 paces to his right, dressed all in a green that made her hair burn. Her hands were quiet. Her eyes were not. "The gods have said," Pycelle intoned, "that Lord Tyrion Lannister is innocent of the most abominable regicide. We rejoice that their wisdom has, guided us." He cleared his throat. It sounded like an oar dragging through slack water. "Yet grave matters remain, grievous matters, yes." A confession was, uttered upon the sand. Names were spoken. Then, Oberyn looked at Tywin then, because he could not look. The older man had positioned himself at the base of the steps, a little to the right, where his face could be seen by those to whom he wished it seen. He had never appeared to wait. He had always appeared to allow others to discover that he had been there before them. Now he stood like the memory of a statue. If any cluster of muscle in his jaw changed, Oberyn's eye, which had counted the tension of bowstrings across dusk, could not detect it. The gods spoke through trial by combat. Mace Tyrell said jovially, then caught himself at a glance from his formidable mother, who lurked behind a pillar like a storm cloud deciding whether to break. That is the end of the matter regarding the king. Cersei did something with her mouth that in another woman would have been a smile. "My son's murderer is still at large," she said. Her eyes cut to Tyrion, then away with contempt that was too practiced to be wholly genuine. She turned to Oberyn. "And my daughter's uncle rehearses slanders beneath the sun to please the rabble. What is spoken by a dying man means nothing. A dog will whine any name if made to. Vendero. The dog you kept on a golden chain rotted from within," Oberyn said. That he said it without heat helped it cut more cleanly. He spoke before half the realm. The half that matters, at least. Truth has a way of crawling under doors. Dender. "The crown," Tywin said, not looking at Cersei when he interrupted her. He had no need to. He'd been interrupting her since she learned to walk. "Does not stand accused. The trial was of one man, and his guilt or innocence was adjudged by arms. The words of the other man bear the weight of a dying brute's bile." He turned his gaze to Oberyn at last, and Oberyn found himself briefly light in the knees with the pleasure of old hatred, given a face so close and clean. "Prince Oberyn, you have served the law as a judge and the crown as a guest. Dorne's hospitality is known. I trust she will accept ours now that these distasteful shows are concluded." No. It was art, the way the old lion could seat a threat in velvet. A distasteful show, as if the killing of the mountain had been a juggler dropping. Oberyn thought of Elia's little girl. He had never seen her, not alive, but he had seen the small smashed skull, and his hands tightened on the spear out of sight beneath his sleeve, so as not to betray what he held. "Dorne accepts what she desires," he said. "Not every plate pressed upon a guest must be eaten. As for distasteful shows, Lord Hand, better a slice of sunlit sand than deeds done in dark rooms to cradle men from consequences. We dislike dark rooms in Dorne. They make mold." "Then sour set sea." "Bastard japes," Cersei said. "How quaint." Tyrion, who had been standing very straight with the stubborn tilt of a man using his spine to hold himself in place against the wind, bowed with a mocking grace that had weight in it. "Your Grace, my Lord Hand, I am, it appears, innocent. I would like my clothes back and a bath. After that, perhaps a little time to consider whether I still love this city." He let the pause sit exactly as long as it needed to, in order to make a laugh grow in the gallery and die in the nobles' throats. "I believe I will return to my rooms, unless I am to be given new rooms in the dungeons out of habit." "The law is satisfied," Tywin said. The words were stones, dropped cleanly one by one. "Go." He did not say to whom which was artistry again. Men more frightened than ready to think filled in the blanks with obedience. When it ended not with a clang but like all such proceedings, with a slow leak of presence, courtiers draining away into their own little lives. Oberyn did not move for a while. He felt Ilaria at his shoulder like a counterweight. When he took a breath and turned to her, she shook her head a fraction, which was more eloquent than any flood of speech. He smiled with only one corner of his mouth and began to walk. The spear sent murmurs before him. Spears will do that, even when their heads are clean. They went to the Dornish apartments, set aside in Maegor's holdfast. Sand had been laid in long, shallow trays on the balconies, a laughable attempt by some well-meaning functionary to make desert for the guests. Oberyn stepped barefoot across it all the same, because the grain of it under his sole soothed him, and because it reminded him how easily men with good intentions failed to understand anything beyond their own wine cups. He watched a pigeon leave white star shapes in the sand, and then trudge off to shit on a merlin. Ilaria set a bowl of water for him, clean and cool, and he washed his hands and forearms and the spear's shaft, enjoying the feel of linen on wood. She watched him, and then took the cloth and finished the blade herself, her brow furrowed as if there were sums to be done. He waited until she made her own decision to speak. "I am pleased you are alive," she said. "I am displeased you look as if you left your body down there and climbed up with only a shadow." He looked at his hands. They were his hands, long and brown, with white crescent scars notched across the knuckles where knives had kissed them. "Sometimes one must bring the shadow back to find the rest," he said quietly. She touched the hollow above his breastbone with 2 fingers and left them there until he breathed under them. "Do not get lost," she murmured, and the softness in her tone had a grain in it, as if she rubbed love smooth with salt like a fisherman caring for his net. "Your brother can be lost and still be Prince of Dorne. You cannot be lost and do the thing you think you will do." "What do I think I will do?" He smiled a little, into his own riddle. "Turn the world," she said. She did not smile. "I have watched you study it as if it were a metal. And you, a smith looking for the place where it will bend. You killed the man who crushed Elia. But you did not kill the thing that ordered the crushing." "Bend how?" "I heard him say a name," Oberyn said. "I heard him gurgle a word," she retorted, and there was no malice in it. Only an insistence that made him love her again, as if for the first time. "You will not bring Elia back by making more corpses to lie beside hers. She is not a measuring stick for your vengeance." "Now?" "No." He dried the spear with slow care, and then set it in the carved stand by the wall that some king had commissioned to cradle a dragon hunting lance that had long since been melted down. "She is a door. I've been standing outside it, asking it to open. I think likely I must break it." "Break what you like," Ilaria said, turning and walking to the balcony, hips carrying shadow like a sash. "Only keep our girls from the falling stones." He followed her to the rail and placed his hands over hers. From the balcony, the city looked like pottery that had been fired too fast, glaze bubbling up where the kilners had not watched. He found he loved it all the same, with that strange tenderness only a man who would cheerfully burn a thing can feel. Across the yard he could see the Red Keep's other galleries alive with the news. The city's breath had changed. It was a hawk's breath now, high and tight. He listened until he heard the faint clatter of men in armor moving in a rhythm written by a man who had never sweated in armor. He knew that rhythm. He waited for it to resolve into a knock on his door, or a scream, or a blaze. Instead, a raven croaked. The bird landed foolishly on the rail like a sot too pleased with his own joke, and allowed a servant to relieve it of its tube. The message within was short enough to be a wound and neat enough to have been stitched by a careful needle. Ariohota's hand had written it at the Prince of Dorne's dictation. Oberyn could see the careful, spare strokes of quill. "Brother," the words said, "I rejoice that your heart still beats. The tide has turned. Do not pretend you can see all the rocks." He laughed then, a rough warm burst that made Ilaria lift her head, startled, before she took the note and read and nodded. "Doran," she said. In that one name she packed contradiction. The man with sand-addled joints, the prince with the temper of still water. He tells you to be careful on a path he would have delayed until it grew over with vines. He will have his vines, Oberyn said. I will have my path. They drank wine then. The light paled Dornish kind that carried its own sunlight inside it, and ate olives, and watched a green lizard pursue flies across a carved balustrade with the same slow intensity with which lords pursued favors. Oberyn let the breath that had been caught in his chest. Since the mountain fell thin itself, a hush came with it that was more restful than sleep. When night took the city with a broad, soft hand, he went walking. It was something he had done as a boy in Sunspear. Slipping from his bed to pad in silence across the cool flagged floors of the water gardens, listening to the moon talk to the fountains. Here, there were no fountains speaking Dornish, but there were other voices. The Red Keep had its songs too. Old Iron's whine, the whisper a silk slipper makes, when some lord's daughter thinks she is invisible and is right, the complaining creak of a bolt too rarely drawn. He walked with no deliberate destination and found himself where men who were not meant to meet met, because they were meant to meet. A small cloister that overlooked the river, where moonlight pooled like milk and things that wished to be hidden could hide between pillar and vine. Varys came out of a shadow like a moth emerging from a dark fold of cloth. He did not startle. He did not seem ever to have been any place other than the place where one found him. The eunuch wore lilac and a smile that had boundaries a man could see if he looked carefully. The boundaries lay not at the mouth's corners, but in the eyes, in the weight of attention he allowed. "Prince," he said, bowing exactly as deep as a man bowing to a prince ought. "I rejoice that the gods found in your arm the judgment we could not find in our hearts." "They found poison," Oberyn said. "And patience." "Poison is honest," Varys murmured. "It does no more than it intends, and has no vanity to complicate its work." He touched a pillar lightly, a courtier greeting an old friend. "You have loosed some birds today. Did any fly toward you?" Oberyn asked. Varys made a mouse squeak of a laugh. "All birds fly toward me, or away from me, or both depending on the time of day. You have made the lion look very slightly behind him. He does not like that. He has not had to look behind him in many years." "He will either turn," Oberyn said, "or imagine there is nothing there. Men who imagine there is nothing there tend to trip at stairs." "Mendor." "Lord Tywin does not trip," Varys said serenely. "He arrives, but even those who arrive can be made to arrive in places they did not anticipate if a man knows how to lay roads." "You are a man who lays roads, Prince." "Do not flatter," Oberyn said. "Tell me what you want. It will save us both time and the crown's candle money." "Then?" Varys folded his hands, which were soft enough to be a woman's hands. "There is a boy," he said, and for a moment Oberyn tasted pepper on his own tongue and thought of Rhaegar's son. "There are many boys. The one I am thinking of is in trouble. He does not yet know he is in. You are a man who has, let us say, an ear for old names and a stern dislike of how some were broken. I am a man who prefers his kingdoms minimally broken." "Thou, the boy king?" Oberyn asked. "The boy born of cunning and incest will not be king long," Varys said in that mild voice that made such statements sound like lessons in fruit preserves. "But that is not the boy I mean. That boy, with his cats and his overgrown mother, is the kind that simply happens to a country like gout. It will pass. There is another, and there is a girl far away whom fire has taken in hand." He looked up then, and the moonlight gave his soft face a strange, chiseled austerity. "Dorne has long memories. The dragon's shadow once fell sweet upon your gardens." "And no." Oberyn had not needed the man to say it. Viserys had been an embarrassment they had endured. Daenerys was rumor, and smoke turned suddenly to substance. And there were other rumors, names that had crept through Dorne's roads like mists. A young man with eyes like old coins, raised across the sea, taught to be the thing his blood said he should be. He did not believe or disbelieve them. He kept them in his hand with the other marbles. "And what would you ask of the viper?" Oberyn said softly. Only this, Varys said. Keep breathing. Breathe in, King's Landing. Make the lion turn his head more often. When men must look so many ways at once, they begin to rely on whispers to tell them what is behind. That is good for men like me. If you leave or die, the lion will simply fix his gaze, and that will be an end to many conversations I should like to continue. Perhaps in return I can make you aware when certain conversations become too pointed for your taste. And now, he held Oberyn's gaze while saying a thing that would have offended a man with less humor. Oberyn found his humor and kept it in hand, turning it like a coin to test its weight. You will tell me when the hand moves against me, he said. I will tell you when the hand sharpens a knife that seems very much to have your shape in mind. Varys said gently. I cannot guarantee who will hold it. Oberyn inclined his head. And would you like me to kill anyone for you tonight? Varys' smile seated itself more firmly. If I had wanted anyone killed today, I would have made you aware of it yesterday. No, Prince. Keep breathing. It is rare enough in this place to be an art. Leave killing for days when the wind is slow. Even poison cannot find a still heart if the man it hunts refuses to be still. And now, when the eunuch had folded himself back into the palace like a napkin returned to a plate, Oberyn remained in the cloister until the moon sank to the height of a man's shoulder. He felt the old ache in his thigh, an injury that had loved him since a spear had been less kind, and let it be a little flame to light his way back. He passed a room whose shutter had been left open a finger's breadth for air, and heard laughter within. A woman's good-humored laughter that made him think of his daughters when they were younger, goat-wild and sand-dusty. He thought of them now, older, knives in their eyes and laughter still. And he wondered how much of himself they carried, and how much of Elia, and whether Ilaria had been right when she had asked him not to pass this hunger onto their mouths. He slept badly, as he always had on the nights when he killed. Morning found him before it found the city, and placed its pale hand upon his eyelids, as a mother wakes a child by stroking. He rose, drank water, chewed mint, stretched until the whispers in his tendons quieted, and sent a note to Lord Tywin requesting an audience, not as judge or guest, but as Oberyn Martell, brother to the Prince of Dorne. He did not particularly expect the hand to accede. He expected a letter, very fine, explaining that the Lord was occupied at this hour, but would take grave pleasure in arranging a conversation in some indefinite future. He had been given such letters by men like Tywin, in 3 languages, on 2 continents. He had kept none. He had kept the stitches they left instead. The answer came before he had finished a dish of eggs with peppers and sweet onion. The boy delivering it looked like a page everywhere and nowhere, wrapped in the keep's pale livery like a gift from someone who had forgotten the occasion. His voice squeaked once on the milord, and once on the noon. The letter itself was plain. The hand would receive Prince Oberyn in the Tower of the Hand at noon. The words were so small a man might have missed them entirely in a world that had just changed. Ilaria ate an olive thoughtfully. He will try to make a story of you, she said. Something to tell himself later that ends with you as caution. That is why I will bring a different story, Oberyn said. One in which he is an old man listening to new music. We will see if he can dance a step. Thou. They walked together as far as the maze of stairs that led to the Hand's Tower, because it pleased him to have her beside him, in her simple dress with its drawn linen grace, and in the way she held herself, always as if she were aware of her feet, of each toe's delight or complaint. At the landing she paused. If you must be cruel, she said, be accurate. I intend to be both, he said, and kissed her, and went. The Tower of the Hand was not the tallest in the Red Keep, but it was the one that had learned smugness. It leaned its weight, as if to remind other towers who had whispered orders that became men's deaths. The hall outside the Hand's solar held a line of tapestries that would have fetched a king's ransom in mire. Hunting scenes with boars and brave dogs and frightened eyes in the bushes, where a man who had taken a woman without asking crouched and watched, and wished himself anywhere but where he was. The guards were the kind of Lannister men who looked good from a distance and smelled poorly up close. Oberyn smiled at them as he passed. He could smell their breakfast on their breath. He could smell the fear under it too. A sour thing like cabbage kept too long. Tywin had made his solar into a camp that had won 1,000 wars. The table was not a desk, but a map that happened to stand on legs. The walls were the same simplicity as the hand's face, plaster and stone. Few hangings. A brazier made the air smell of clean charcoal. There was an order here that was like the order of an abattoir. It was tidy because it did not permit messes to live. "Prince," the hand said. He did not sit. Neither did Oberyn. Men who sit yield ground. "You send men," Oberyn said, "who tore my sister as if she were cloth." If there had been a more politic opening, he did not desire it. Politics is a habit, and he had no wish to form a new one now. "I did what was required to end a war," Tywin said. He did not blink. His green-brown eyes had the calm of a predator that has eaten well and cannot imagine hunger. "You did what was required to set a table for your family," Oberyn said. "You used our bodies for napkins." He leaned forward a fraction. "He said your name." "He said lion," Tywin corrected. "He said old." He was dying. He was a beast who had only ever been taught 2 hands worth of words. If he meant me, he would have said me. If he meant me, you may take consolation that the truth cannot be proven now, and that I will take consolation in the same. Menschau. Oberyn let the quiet between them become a long, slow blade. He found in the place beneath his breastbone where rage once lived, a smaller animal now. Quicker and less glorious. It knew how to bite where it counted. "Dorn will take satisfaction in the mountain's death," he said, and watched the hand's eyes. They did not flicker. "Good. But Dorn will also take consideration for our dead from the crown's purse or the Lannisters' vaults. Coin is not justice, it can only be recognition. If you mistook my purpose for grace, you will have time now to correct yourself. And, you have no standing to demand anything," Tywin said mildly. "Your brother is the Prince of Dorn. You are his brother. You are a guest. Your presence would be a courtesy if it were not a nuisance. Standing," Oberyn said softly, "is always a matter of legs. I have mine." He smiled then, not a threat but a promise. "Here is what will happen. Dorn will not move while you still sit in that chair. Dorn will watch. Dorn will listen for the name of a boy far away, and when it is sung, we will see whether we like the tune. You will do none of that," Tywin said. "You will go back to your sands and teach your bastards how to knife men in alleys, and you will nurse your wine, and you will send clever little letters. I know Dorn. I have dealt with Dorn my whole life. Dorn is too cautious to be brave and too proud to be cunning. I do not fear you." That, Oberyn realized with the clarity of clean water, was true. Tywin did not fear. He managed fear in others. He replaced it with lesser currencies when it did not buy what he wanted. He spent contempt when fear could not purchase. It had bought him kingdoms. "Do not fear me," Oberyn said. "Fear what grows because you do not fear anything." He left the solar then, because there are no victories in a room where one man has carried his favorite weather in with him. He found the hall much the same, as halls tend to be, when the news we carry away is the thing that changed. In the stairs he passed Jaime Lannister. The man leaned on the rail with his new stiffness, and looked at the place where his right hand had once been as men look at places where cities had once been. The gold hand that replaced it had the smooth blank of a god's. "You have made my father many enemies," Jaime said, with something almost like appreciation. "He always said it was best to make them by necessity, rather than habit. He made these out of necessity," Oberyn said. "You were there when Elia was married. You were a boy with bright hair and a sword too long for your hips. I remember you slicing fruit with it for Cersei and laughing when sweet juice made a mess of the floor. Do you remember?" "Now." Jaime's mouth tightened. "I remember very little sweetness," he said. "But I remember there was once fruit. Bring your nephew, a better tutor than your sister," Oberyn said. Jaime smiled with his mouth and not his eyes. "My sister takes all instruction as insult. I'll leave bettering Tommen to the gods and you. You seem to be on speaking terms with both today." "We shall see," Oberyn said and passed. The next days were a weaving. Threads of caution, threads of small moves. The city's alleys carried his name on their lips like a prayer or a curse, depending on whether the speaker dreamed of Dornish girls or remembered a brother lost at the Green Fork, whose death the city now attached to Lannister pride, the way a child sticks a stone into a pie. He walked through markets with Ilaria and let the smell of fish and bad sausage, of overripe plums and clean leather, steady him. He met with Tyrion in a shadowed corner of an inn where the honey had a sourness that made it honest. They talked of smaller things in order to respect the larger. "I will leave this city," Tyrion said, after the fourth cup, which was wise and therefore ill-chosen. "Not because I fear dying here, but because I fear living here. It draws the worst of me out through my skin." "You will not go quietly then," Oberyn observed. "When have I?" Tyrion said. "But I will go. Varys kindly informed me that my father has written a letter to the Watch, offering me a place. He is generous to a fault with other men's lives." "Do not go to the Wall," Oberyn said. "There is always wind in your hair there, and I do not think wind is your friend." "I am glad you approve of my continued breathing," Tyrion said dryly. "My father does not, and my sister less." "Your brother does," Oberyn said. "He does not know what to do with it. But he does." Tyrion stared into his cup. "Do you know," he said, "that I loved my father once? Boys must, I suppose. It seemed to me then that no part of the world could stand unless he held it upright. I find now that the world stands because it is round and rolling, not because of any man's hands. Sometimes it rolls over men." "Then you could roll with it," Oberyn said. "Go eastite. Let yourself be used by someone who knows how to use. Pick the one who will not break you at the end." "Da. Your advice is terrifying because it is sound," Tyrion said, and laughed a little, and drank. That night Varys sent another whisper. Shay was in the Tower of the Hand, as rumor had already told, and as Tyrion's heart had already known. Oberyn told no one. He bore the knowledge as one bears a small hot coal in a paper cup, knowing it will burn through if set down. He did not warn Tyrion. Men suffer worse wrecks for being spared smaller ones. He had learned that in a bedchamber, not a battlefield. He did wait in the garden beneath the Hand's Tower as the moon climbed like a white-limbed girl into the branches of the sky. He heard the sound of a struggle above that had nothing heroic in it. There are no heroics in the sort of grappling where a man reaps what he himself has sown in his own bed. He heard a cough and a dragging. He smelled a torch gutter. He smelled something else then, a hot iron smell that is not blood. He watched shadows moving in windows, as if a play were being staged of mankind's oldest little follies. He did not go up. When Tyrion came down, he looked like a man who had walked too close to a fire and had not yet found his eyebrows. His hands were empty. His eyes were not. "You did not stop me," he said. "It would not have mattered if I had," Oberyn said. Tyrion made a sound that could have been a laugh if it could have found its feet. "It was not the brave deed one plans for in boyhood," he said. "It was a petty thing. All the same, it was something that had to be something. Does that make sense?" "It makes sense," Oberyn said. "Do you wish to die?" "More than I wish to stay in this city," Tyrion said. "Less than I wish to drink water." He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and stared at his palm, as if expecting to find words there. "I am leaving." Oberyn inclined his head. "Breathe," he said. "And when you find yourself on a road where the wind smells of salt and hot stone together, think of Dorne." "I always think of Dorne when I smell sweet things," Tyrion said. "Sweet things that might bite." He lifted a hand, an awkward half-wave, and laughed again. This time a little more like a man laughing at a joke he had heard before and loved because of it. "Good night, Prince. I wish you enemies no better than you deserve." Tyrion left, as men leave this city when they are clever or desperate, in a crate or with a song. Varys birds fluttered that night, and in the morning a ship that had not been in the harbor the day before was not there to be counted among those that were. Cersei raged in her rooms and broke a mirror. The sound of the breaking sailed like a gull over the keep's courts. Tywin summoned men and counted money, and sent ravens that did not know they were not meant to be enough. Oberyn slept in short bouts and woke with the certainty one has sometimes that a particular hour is important. And if a man misses it, he will never find the same hinge again, only the door banging uselessly. He walked the city with Ilaria and watched faces. The mountain they had moved would bring stones down without a plan. He would have to move among the falling with purpose. Word reached him in the afternoon as a whisper in his ear from a boy who smelled of fish. The gold cloaks had taken a man with a shaved head and soft hands in an alley by the river, and the man had smiled, and the captain had been disturbed without understanding why. The hand wanted to question him privately. Oberyn returned to the Red Keep with a speed he did not trouble to hide. In the corridor outside the hand's inner chamber, he found silence. It was a silence with weight. Men standing too still, the sense of a held breath being held too long, the slow seep of smoke from under a door. He opened the door without knocking. Tywin Lannister sat in a chair, not his accustomed one, not the seat of the hand behind the map table, but a smaller carved thing set against an inner wall near the hearth. His body had slumped as bodies do when whatever makes decisions inside them has gone elsewhere. His tunic was open at the belly and at the throat. A bolt was planted in him, one in the gut, one higher, an obscene red flower with a black stem. His eyes were half open as if to watch motes dance in a beam. The smell in the room was the smell that had floated on the garden's air the night before, a smell less of death than of what death leaves behind for the living to deal with. Qyburn stood by the hearth with his lips pursed like a seamstress angry at a knot. He looked at Oberyn as if the prince had arrived to examine a curiosity in a jar. The eunuch was there also, the soft man already arranging his face for the next conversation. Cersei was not there. Jaime was not there. The scene had the feeling of a play that had not finished dressing. Varys allowed his mouth to tilt. "A tragedy," he said mildly. "That the hand should have taken ill." Oberyn walked forward, and for a mad instant he wanted to laugh. Not with humor, but with some recognition too complex for recognition. He had not done this. He had not loosed this bolt. He had not desired this precise ending now. Yet here it stood, like a stranger who knows your name. He looked at the dead man's face and found no fear there, no understanding. Death had caught Tywin Lannister without the courtesy of letting him contemplate himself. There was a kind of mercy in that which disgusted Oberyn. "Do you enjoy it?" Qyburn asked, eyes glittering with illicit curiosity. He had a voice like a file. "Do you find the sight sweet?" "I find it unsatisfying," Oberyn said. "If a man must pay, he ought to count out the coins. He ought to name the debt he is paying and say from whom he borrowed. A bolt is a rude collector." "Rude," Varys agreed. The word precise. "But reliable." Oberyn turned away from the corpse. It was only a body now, and soon enough would be an argument. He did not intend to waste himself on a corpse arguments. In the hall he found Sir Kevan Lannister with his hand in his hair for once, making his white fringe resemble a halo given to a man who had not deserved one. The uncle turned toward Oberyn as if toward a doctor and asked the question every man asks, in the same 3 words, with the same 3 weights, the first heavy, the second hollow, the third a stone. "Is he dead?" "He is dead," Oberyn said. He let his voice carry the respect one owes a formidable enemy at the end, not for the enemy's sake, but for the shape a man would prefer his own life to have had. "The city will need steady hands. Look to your sister and your niece and nephew. I will look to Dorne." Kevan closed his eyes. "Will you touch this lightly?" he asked, and the language of politics crept back into his mouth, though grief had choked it a little. "Will Dorne?" "Dorne will watch," Oberyn said. "And wait. And remember." He placed his hand briefly on the other man's shoulder and felt through cloth a bone that had surrendered to age. That night the bells tolled, and with their tolling the city discovered that all its mischief had opened a wider channel. Fear began to creep in, less gaudy than rage, less fragrant than victory, but better at finding corners. The small folk spoke of curses, the great houses spoke of plans. The queen waxed and waned in temper like a tide that does not know what draws it. The boy king cried once, before setting his mouth in a line he had learned from watching men who liked lines. Marguerite comforted with perfection. The faith stirred in their cells where sparrows had been nesting in men's thoughts for months now. The Tyrells counted swords. The Martells made no noise. Oberyn wrote to Doran by candlelight, with his spear propped near his knee. He did not write of Tywin's last undignified hour. He wrote of possibility, which is a more faithful courier. He told his brother that the hand had died, that the lion was for a season headless, that the city was full of small kings. He wrote that he could smell the salt wind of Essos blowing from the east, and that on it there were names like sails, snap, and promise both. He wrote that the girl with the dragons was no longer a shadow. He wrote that the boy some called Aegon was either a lie that had managed to raise flesh to clothe itself, or a truth that had been too shy to show its face until now. He wrote that the north was in chaos, the riverlands in ashes, the Vale sleeping, the Reach too plump to run, and the Westerlands a hive that would either find a new queen or eat itself for want of sweetness. And he wrote, in a line that stopped his quill, so that a blot swelled like a dark flower, that Elia's name had been said beneath the sun where even stony men heard, and that the world would have to do something with that sound now. He did not say what. He signed with his name, and with the little sign he had always put under his name, the line and the dot that was not a viper, but made his hand remember one. Ellaria came to him, and put her hands on either side of his face, and held him as still as a cup. "Are you happy?" she asked simply. "Happy," he said, and let the word sit in his mouth. "No, dot, bite. I am awake. Gun. That will do." She said, and kissed his brow, as if he were a child who had frightened himself with a dream, and did not yet know whether to be relieved that dreams end, or to be disappointed that they do. In the morning, he went to the wharf and stood with his hands in his sleeves and watched ships. The gulls made remarks to one another about fish and death. The river stank of the things men throw into it when they believe the water is a mouth that will eat anything. He thought of Dorne's clean sand, and how the sea there licked it like a lover who knows to be gentle some days and rough others, depending on the sky's moods. He did not see Tyrion leave. That was well. He would have preferred to leave many things unseen in his life, and yet here he was, knowing them. He had seen a mountain fall. He had seen a father die badly. He had seen a child king's hand tremble when it signed a thing he did not understand. He had seen the face of a brother who would wait and wait and wait until the right fly landed, and then swat. He went back to the keep by the long way, and paused in a street where the morning had found 3 women with a shared pot and a shared loss, laughing as they tore bread and dipped it in stew. He laughed with them when one scolded the other for biting her finger, and they looked up, recognized him, and bowed awkwardly in a way that was not fear but something like pride on his behalf. He bowed in return and kept walking. By noon he was writing again. He wrote not just to Doran but to men he trusted in Gulltown, across the narrow sea, in the courts where the tongues were forked, but the wine decent. He wrote to a sellsword captain with a scar down his calf who had once taught him a trick with a spear he had altered and made his own. He wrote to a woman in Lys whose bed had been stairs into a conversation that had lasted years. He wrote to a maester who had given up his chain and taken up birds because he could no longer bear the lies that congregated around ink. He told them each a version of the same thing. Breathe. Wait. Listen. Whine. Use your knives only when you are certain what the cut will sever and what will bleed. And at dusk, he went to the yard where the duel had been. Men were there already, grubbing in the sand for dried blood, as if it were a relic they might keep to speak of to grandchildren. The divots from the mountain's sword had hardened into shapes like ponds gone dry. The place where Gregor had fallen was a lake of flattened grains, where the weight had made a temporary earth. Oberyn walked the circle of it without speaking. He touched his toe lightly to one of his own old prints, and found it had half survived the trampling of 1,000 curious feet. "Say her name," he said very softly. And the yard gave the name back, not in echo, but in the sense that a place that has heard something true does not forget. Ilia. A breeze came, the first of evening's breath, and he felt it lift the hair at his neck and carry the smallest threads of the day away. He stood in the breath. He let it wrap him as the city earlier had tried to wrap him in smells. He thought of the road ahead. How much of it would be made of stone and how much of sand, and whether his feet would bleed or callous. He thought of his daughters, of Nymeria's steel and Tynene's sweet smile and Obara's eye that never forgave. Of the others younger yet, all teeth and mischief, all cracked knees and olives stolen from jars. He thought of Illyria's hand a weight on his chest, pulling him down into sleep, like a kind anchor. He thought of fire. He thought of a girl across the sea whose name men had begun to say with the same mixture of terror and appetite with which they had once said dragon. He thought of a boy some called Aegon and whether he would be a man who tasted the world or spat it out. He thought of the Reach and the Vale and the North. Of wolves thin with grief, of birds standing on high perches, of gardens fat with plans. He thought of the ways a wheel may be broken without being replaced by another wheel, a lesson too many men refused to learn. He did not think of Tuin. That work was done. Night took the yard and the yard did not notice. Night took the city, and the city noticed the way a restless sleeper notices a lover turning and pulling the sheet. Men put candles out, and others lit them. Queens kissed sons on the brow, and asked themselves if the warmth they felt in their own hearts was love or relief that another day had ended with the crown still on the right head. On a ship sliding out of the harbor, a small man stood with his hand on a rail, thinking of fathers and sisters, and a prince who had told him to breathe. In a tower in Sunspear, a patient man with swollen joints set a cup down and looked long at a map where the colors never stopped wrangling with one another. In a desert not far from a city of bones, 3 creatures who had never been asked permission to exist lifted their heads to the moon and sang a song that remembered other moons. Oberyn Martell lay on his back and listened to Illyria's sleep and to the deep animal sounds of the keep. He held his breath until his chest ached. Then he let it go. The breath returned to him of its own accord, as breath will if a man is lucky. He smiled into the dark, not at joy, but at the certainty that day would come again, and with it, heat, and with the heat, work. He did not mind work. In the morning, before the sun had climbed to the height of a spear over the river, he took his weapon and went to the yard alone. He planted the butt in the earth and leaned on it as on a staff. He imagined Elia's voice, not begging, not accusing, only speaking as she had used to speak when she sat with him in the water gardens. A book forgotten in her lap, and her finger marking a place that she pretended she could return to. He did not imagine what she said. He did not have to. The morning said it for her. He began to move, not fast, and not with the flourish that men like to see when they watch a prince practice. He moved the way a man breathes. The ash bent against his palm and sprang back. The blade whispered to him. He held his wrists soft and his fingers hard, and he thought about numbers. He counted as he had in the ring. 1, 2, 3. He counted not touches now but possibilities, a counting done in the currency of the future. He did not know yet how the door would break. He knew only that he could not stand forever outside it asking politely. He had been polite in his soul for too many years. He had spent that wealth and felt cleaner for it. Mid-morning found him on the palace wall looking out over water where barges nosed like pigs at a trough. Jaime Lannister came and stood beside him without asking, the gold on his wrist dull in the light of a day that had made a sport of dulled golds. They did not speak at first, because some men must listen together before they can say anything that is worth saying. "My father taught me," Jaime said finally, and his voice was like a man telling something to a boy who is gone now, and will not hear it, that we must never describe a man as a monster, unless we intend to kill him. Monstrousness permission. It simplifies. It makes neat piles, where there are none. But today I find I prefer neat piles. Your father liked to stack, Oberyn said. He liked to build order out of other men's disorder. But he did not ask where the disorder came from. He only broke it and set his stones on the ground where the breaking left him out. My father made a realm, Jaime said. He did not sound as if he believed it. He sounded as if he were measuring a set of clothes he had been told fit and finding them uncomfortable in the thighs. Now he is gone, and now the realm will make itself, Oberyn said. Jamie turned his head and looked full at him. "And you?" he asked. "What will you make?" Oberyn considered the river. It had been dirty yesterday. It would be dirty tomorrow. It would move all the same. "A way," he said. "I will make a way." "Toward what?" Jamie pressed. "Toward a day when Elias' name is only a name spoken in love," Oberyn said. "Toward a place where men like your friend there with the knives, Qyburn, are not allowed to make friends." He waited until Jamie's mouth tightened in involuntary distaste. "Toward a field where sand does not merely drink blood but grows something after." "Wheat," Jamie suggested sourly. "Laughter," Oberyn said. "And the coin," Jamie persisted, with the grimness of a man who knows what keeps men in harness. "Who pays?" "We such as we are," Oberyn said. "Because we can." Jamie looked at him as if the words stung, and then away. "My sister will try to kill you," he said. "If only because she does not like flowers that are not hers in her garden." "I think," Oberyn said, and let his hands play lightly with the spear, as if it were no more than a reed he had picked on the walk. "Your sister has many gardens. I am one bee. She cannot swat them all." "You are very sure." "I am very alive." They stood for a while longer and let the city show them its tricks. A troop of children ran along the quay and made sport with a stray dog. A priest in shabby gray lifted his hands to a gathering of small folk and began to speak of sin and bread. A barge bumped another barge, and the two men on each shouted insults that were poetry of a sort. The bell from the great sept sounded, and another from a lesser chapel answered. There was always more bell. When Oberyn left the wall, he did not go to the council chamber. Mace would be there trying very hard to look like he had meant everything. Pycelle would be there trying to look like a sage. Varys would be there looking like a soul. He went instead to the yard again, where he found Ilaria with two of their girls. Tyene stood on a low wall, balanced on the rim of a barrel, as if on a narrow cloud, smiling as if smiles were sweetmeats. Oberyn corrected a boy's grip on a practice spear with a brisk impatience that curled all the boys toward her like fern fronds turning to light. Nymeria was not there. She had gone to find a bit of silk to turn into a cord to make into a snare to teach a jape to a courtier about knots. "You move as if you mean to stay," Ilaria called to him, as if she had read his thoughts. He looked at his feet and saw that they planted themselves with that old stubbornness of men, who come finally to a place they have only ever passed through. "I will stay while there is staying to be done," he said. "Then I will go. Dorne will not wait forever. Doran will not wait forever. The world will not wait at all." "Do not make yourself its clock," Ilaria said, and threw Tyene a practice dagger with a flick that said as much about love as any poem. "I will be its sand," he said, smiling. That evening a raven came with a message from Sunspear, longer than the first. Doran's hand again, but with a line beneath covered in another hand, slanted and sharp. It was Ariane's. It said simply, "Make a story that has a place for me in it when it comes to Dorne. I am tired of stories I cannot enter." He felt a surge of pride and sorrow both. The old tenderness a man has toward a niece who had been a girl at his knee. He rode her back that night by a candle that sputtered and hissed and smelled of tallow bought from a butcher. He wrote, "We will make such a story. We will burn the bad chapters for warmth." And then he slept until he did not, which was when dawn came again. And the world was still the world, and yet not quite. In the days that followed, he played at small games so he could later play at large. He went to see the Tyrell matriarch and allowed her to cut his speech like cloth, until it fit a shape she liked, and in doing so learned where she had hidden her pins. He went to the smithy where Gendry, a thick-armed boy unaware of his own blood, hammered common iron into honest shapes. He watched the boys work for a time and exchanged a few words on weight and balance. He made offerings at the strange shrines where the capital gathered gods like a child pockets marbles. He gambled in a house where the dice were never fair, but the wine was, and won and lost, and let himself be taught the way coins talk when they fall. He did not force the city to look at him. He did not hide. He became, for a passing time, an answer to a question. Is there anyone here who remembers how to name a wrong and make the naming cost? There was. That was enough. But beneath the day's surface he kept count. of ships sailing east, of whispers from merchants who had seen sails pale as eggshells, sown in far ports, of messages sent from the Vale where Lysa Arryn's peculiarities had begun to be a bridge men could walk, of banners taken down in the Westerlands and folded over grief, of sparrows growing to flocks. The door he had named in his heart remained unbroken. He did not kick it yet. He traced with his fingers the places where the wood was softest. He sharpened the heel with which he would strike. He listened at it, because sometimes those on the other side told you everything you needed to know if you put your ear to the wood and brought your breathing low and slow. Thus he waited. Thus he watched. Thus he lived. And every night, when the dark settled like fine ash over the stones and a stray breeze wafted the smell of river and tallow and orange peel to his window, he said her name, not to conjure her like a conjurer cheats at grief, but to keep the mouth of memory from closing. He said Elia, and the world did not break because he said it, but it remembered that it could. He would teach it how. He had time, or he would make time as men make weapons, with fire, with care, with patience that fools mistake for idleness, with the certain knowledge that a hand must one day close around the thing you have forged and feel it fit. He would shape the handle to that hand. He would temper the blade. He would bring it into the sun. And he would not let himself believe in any more miracles than were required to get him from one good breath to the next. Ka. The bells tolled a heavy hour for the dead and made the air in the great sept taste like iron. Incense lay in long pale veils above the pulpit and drifted across the faces of saints whose stone eyes had watched so many kings be born and so many be buried that the saints themselves seemed tired of it. Tywin Lannister had been washed and dressed and laid out inside a coat stiff with embroidery, a golden lion stitched over a heart that had forgotten its duty. They had combed his hair and arranged his hands and done what could be done with the mouth, which even now wished to be giving orders. The cloth of gold beneath his head shone like a false dawn. Oberyn stood far enough from the bier to let other eyes have their feast. Death made a spectacle of men who had made a spectacle of power, and the city had come to see whether the old lion would smell. He did. A faint sweetness crept through the myrrh like a spilled syrup under a good wine. Pycelle fussed and dabbed. Qyburn watched, mildly amused, his expression the tidy satisfaction of a man taking notes on rot. Cersei stood like a pillar with vines of grief trained up it, not watered often but arranged. Jaime remained at her shoulder, his mouth set as if he had bitten into something that had core and sour. The boy on whose head a crown now sat looked as if he had been told to stand very straight and to think of kittens. His eyes returned to his mother every few heartbeats, as if she were a lantern afloat on a dark lake. Outside, beyond the carved doors, a different congregation gathered, one with bare soles and patched elbows. The poor had come in the manner of poor people, ready to be told there was holiness in the bread they would not eat. A thin man among them, barefoot and stooped, touched 2 fingers to each beggar he passed and murmured small words that had more warmth than the incense. He was nobody yet. Oberyn saw the way the gold cloaks looked through him, the way a baker looks through a stray dog. But the air seemed to take his words and settle them like seeds. The High Septon's voice filled the sept, oiled with ritual. We commend the Lord hand to the Father's justice, the Mother's mercy, the warrior's strength, the smith's. The litany rolled. Oberyn let it wash over him in a way. He studied faces instead. Margaery Tyrell had made sorrow become her. The girl had the gift of letting a room believe it had invented her. Behind her, Lady Olenna's mouth was a tidy blade. The woman considered grievances like a cook considers meat: where to carve, how much fat to discard, whether the fire should be slow or bright. When it ended, as such rites end, in a cloud of smoke and a procession, Oberyn remained a moment longer and looked upon the corpse. He had not been a man to waste a look in life. He would not waste one now. Death had not diminished Tywin. It had only made a better frame for the exact measure he had already been. The mouth that had made a world of straight lines now made only one, and it was a poor one. Outside, the bells fell quiet, and the street found its noise again. Carts creaked, and apprentices whistled, and the gutters served their ancient function. Lady Olenna drifted to his side without appearing to intend to do any such thing. Her cane clicked softly on stone, a domestic sound that somehow made every lord within hearing lean an ear. "Prince," she said in a voice that could have told a nursery tale and made it the record of a murder. "You have a gift for changing the recipe midway through the cooking. It is not a quality I despise. It is merely one I prefer when I am warned." "The dish came to a boil," he said. "It is unkind to blame the flame for doing what it does. It is foolish to let the pot boil over if one means to keep eating," she said. "Cersei is all steam now. She will choose whatever course makes the largest noise and the smallest sense." Her eyes measured him as if she tested a tapestry's die for fastness. "Will Dorne aim at war because your mountain confessed like a drunk with a purse slit?" "Dorne will aim at what we have always aimed at," he said. "We will not allow men to believe our dead can be arranged without price. We will not allow the living to believe they can take our daughters for coins in their pockets. My granddaughter is no coin," she said sharply. Then, after the knife had shown itself, she slid it back into velvet. "Nor is your sister's memory a purse to be turned out at market. You have done something here, Prince, and we all must live with it. I have a fancy for living, so does my Rose. The Queen has a fancy for other people's funerals. Keep her busy if you please, and we shall keep you in wine." "Wine is better than favors," he said. "Favors stain the tongue. Everything stains," she said, and tapped away, Loyalty walking at her elbow dressed as a maid. Jaime found him as the mourners bled out into the day. The Kingslayer's gold hand caught light and threw it like a helm catching a stray blow. He had never been more handsome than now, when he was learning where his body ended. There is a bravery in men when they discover a new border. "She thinks you came here to laugh," he said without preface, soft enough that the nearest squire would have missed the words altogether. "My sister. She thinks you wait to laugh. I came to see if the old lion looks smaller with his eyes shut," Oberyn said. "He does not. He looks exactly himself." "And now?" "That is the lesson of him," Jaime said. "He needed no eyes to see. He needed no ears to hear. Now he will need neither, and yet there will be men who swear they still feel his hands on their throats." "You are free of them," Oberyn said. "If you want to be." "Am I?" Jaime's smile was a blemish on his own dignity. "We are never free of a thing while it still sits in our heads. Even dead men sit." "Then get up and walk him," Oberyn said. "He will either follow and be taught to heel, or he will fall behind. Either way you will stop standing where he told you to." "Mentorol." Jaime glanced toward the Queen, toward the beer, toward the doors, with a small involuntary tilt of the head that reminded Oberyn of a boy looking to see if a teacher watched. "She will make mistakes," he said. "You will be blamed for some of them." "If I could not bear blame, I would be a priest," Oberyn said. The small council met in a room that had learned to keep secrets, each panel of its walls listening the way old wood listens in winter. Cersei sat at the head of the table, because she believed chairs bestow power, and that sitting at the right one made a woman a king. Kevan Lannister stood a little to the side, expression tight as a quiver. He had refused the hand's chain unless his niece withdrew from council, and had been refused in turn. Harys Swift made small agreeable noises without choosing a side to agree with. Pycelle trembled at calculated intervals. Mace Tyrell occupied space like a pleasant storm cloud, an old peacock pleased to have wandered into a room full of mirrors. Qyburn smiled to himself. Oberyn did not sit until the Queen bade him do so, and when she did he chose a chair that let him see the doorway and the windows both. Ellaria would have smiled at that. The little habits soldiers never lose. "The city wants heads," Cersei said, with the briskness of a woman ordering fish. "They are braying for a dwarf's head. We will give them one and all will be well." "Give them apples," Mace suggested heartily. "Apples and sausage." The small folk must be fed, and the lords must be led. His mother did not so much as look at him. The woman had trained herself to control her face the way men learn to ride. We will not give them any heads that do not belong to the body we name, Kevin said. The city wants safety more than spectacle. The gold cloaks have been poorly tended. Bah! The gold cloaks have been purchased, Cersei said. They will belong to the crown when I have finished reminding them of their oaths. How will you remind them? Oberyn asked mildly. With sweetmeats or with the heads you propose to start with? With coin, she said, and lifted her chin, as if she had thought of a new substance. And with example. A few traitors hanged will teach the rest to stand straighter. Bam! Hang the ones who beat the baker's boy last week, Oberyn said. Hang the men who shake coins out of fishwives' skirts at the gate. Hang a captain who sells a woman back her own safety. And send word of those names to the markets, with the amount of coin that changed hands. The small folk care less about a dwarf than about what they must pay in daylight. Then see. The queen's eyes cooled. A Dornishman instructs me on the ways of our city. A Dornishman tells you how men breathe, Oberyn said, not unkindly. We all do it the same. Mace cleared his throat. We will need a new master of coin, he ventured. And a master of whisperers, alas, and He trailed off into good humor as if good humor were a ditch one could roll into to avoid an arrow. Qyburn will serve as master of whisperers, Cersei said. He has the crown's trust. He has yours, Kevin said. No man knows him who ought to. I know him, Cersei said. With that smile women learn who are too long told that knowledge is not their business. Oberyn watched the exchange and found his own corners of mouth lift. He had seen a matador work a bull once in Volantis. The bull had felt itself clever until the last moment, when it realized the man had been drawing little maps all around it with a red cloth and knives. Before we invent new chairs, he said, let us do a small thing that prevents larger mischief. Send the mountain's head to Dorne. Benderol. A silence fell. Not shocked, but different. Like a quiet that comes when a room remembers it has a window. We shall not feed the viper with trophies, Cersei said. That head belongs to the realm. That head, Oberyn said pleasantly, belongs to a woman's memory. To a girl's, to a babe's, to a prince's justice. He tilted his head. To a realm that means to keep peace with Dorne rather than meet us on the boneway. Do not make yourself choose the latter, your grace. It is a long climb. Kevin drew a breath he had been holding since he walked into the room. Send it, he said. Send it with apologies for the lateness. Send it with honor. Say that the crown recognizes a wrong done when no crown sat a kingly head. Men and see. Cersei looked between them as if to decide which to despise first. Qyburn cleared his throat delicately. The remains are, indisposed, he said. Septic processes have a way of. Your pickled jars will have to find another specimen, Oberyn said cheerfully. We will take the skull. You can busy your hands with the rest. Then Dawan. Cersei's eyes struck like flint. She knows, he thought. She knows you know she knows. Very well, she said. The skull shall go to Sunspear. Make up a chest and pad it with velvet, Pycelle. Someone find a septon to clap and say a speech in case the Dornish believe such nonsense matters. No. Send it with a knight, Kevin added, seizing the small good and trying to make it sturdier. A Lannister knight. Let him bow in the water gardens and speak the thing properly. Sir Balon Swan, Mace offered quickly, eager to be useful without cost. The King's Guard are honor. Sir Balon, Cersei echoed. And that was that. She believed she had yielded nothing even as she yielded. That was her gift, to make concessions taste like victories in her own mouth. Afterward, in a turn of corridor that had learned the confidences of a century's worth of ladies and lackeys, Lady Olenna took Oberyn's arm as if he were escorting her for courtesy, and not because she wished to say something where other ears could not dine. You mean to keep that skull out of that creature's cellar? She said without wasting him with flattery. Qyburn does not need a skull to do what he means to do, Oberyn said. But I will have the skull all the same. There is a satisfaction in certain shapes. Your satisfaction is dangerous, she said, which he took as admiration. Do not allow yourself to forget that any woman who begins a sentence with, "do not," has already begun to wish you will. I have never been good at obedience, he said. But I am excellent at accuracy. Then be accurate, she said. About my girl. The queen will dress her innocence in hooks and hang her from a wall if she can find the right nail. You have a nose for leverage. Use it. If we can keep your snakes from biting the wrong ankles, perhaps we will see a spring that does not end in fire. He did not promise. He walked instead to the yard where gold cloaks drilled with indifference, and asked for the captain whose men had shaken coins out of a fishwife's skirts. When the man arrived with his lantern jaw thrust forward and his mouth full of grievance, Oberyn had him flogged. 8 strokes, because 8 had been the coins, and because the city must learn quickly that numbers meant something when he spoke them. He dismissed one sergeant and gave the woman back her coins with another 8 besides, because he liked the look of her defiance, and because compensation is not justice, but it is a bridge. He made the flogging public and the compensation private, and let the story go either way the market preferred. It went both ways, which is what stories do when they are true enough to be useful. At sunset, he walked the street of flour and bought a heel of hot bread, and ate it slowly while the ovens breathed and boys ran, slick with sweat, to pull racks. Ellaria joined him without calling him by name. Her presence a warmth along his left side that steadied without drawing eyes. 2 of his girls followed, Tiny a lily in pale linen, Obara a blade in breeches. They could not help but draw eyes. Do you want me to stick him? Obara asked, meaning every man who looked too long. Not today, he said. Today we eat. We are always eating. She grumbled, but she grinned too, because the bread was good and because her father was alive, which even the most martial heart prefers. That night, a raven whose feathers were as shabby as an excuse brought Sunspear a black ribboned box. Ariohota received it himself at the sea tower's foot, because there are objects a captain does not trust to small hands. He set it on a basin of water and undid the ribbons, and did not flinch when the smell found him. He had smelled worse in worse deserts. He lifted the lid. Within, wrapped in silk that had been blue once, and love dyed too much to remain so, lay a skull whose brow remembered violence, and whose cheekbones were as brutish as the name men had given it in life. Ario reached for what his hands knew, a measuring string. He traced with method the distance from orbit to nasal spine, from mastoid to gonian. He called for a man who had seen the mountain close enough to taste dust off his armor, and asked him to look. The man looked, and swallowed, and looked again, and said rough as gravel, "It's him." Doran sat back in his wheeled chair with a stillness that was not relief, but something that lived nearby, and paid its rent in a coin with fewer sides. Ariane stood behind him, one hand on his shoulder, the other hidden in her skirts where a ring had cut her palm last week, when she had clenched a fist too hard. Myrcella, who had been playing Savas with Tristane at a table where the sand drifted into shapes like small dunes around the board's feet, rose and came soft-footed, and stared at the silk, and stared more at Doran and said nothing at all. Tears rolled down her face, as if her eyes did not know they were doing it. Doran closed his eyes. "Send word to the prince," he said. "Right, Ariodot. You know my hand. Tell my brother that one thing has been done. Tell him to be careful with the rest." Namdan. Ariane bent and kissed his temple, a daughter's motion, and a player's alike. "Quentin?" she said, as if saying the name made it a plan. "Shall we?" "Not yet," Doran murmured. "The east is a table that moves while men dine. Let us see who spills." She frowned slightly. "The queen has lost her father. She will need to prove she can still make men march with her finger. If she moves against Oberyn, if she moves against my brother," Doran said, opening his eyes, "she will move against Dorn. She is not yet ready to do that." He looked at the skull again, and then away, as if cautious of giving it too much attention. "Keep the girl safe. She is more danger than a dagger, if treated as a dagger." Nenderol. Myrcella bowed awkwardly, with Tristaina's hand at the small of her back lending steadiness. "I am not a dagger," she said with a small, brave tilt of chin. "I am a girl. That is why you're dangerous," Arianne said softly, and squeezed her hand. In King's Landing, the day after the skulls sailed, a sparrow on the steps of Baelor's Sept preached thrift to a collection of women who had watched parade after parade of silk pass their doors, and none of it had been for them. Oberyn stopped and listened. The little man's voice had a warmth that came not from any knowledge of books, but from field fires and shared pots and bodies warmed beside one another against winter. He spoke of the seven as if they had been seen in kitchens and lanes. He asked for shoes not for himself, but for the children whose feet he had counted on the road in from salt pans. He did not condemn sated men. He invited hungry men to feed them. When the sermon ended, Oberyn stepped forward, placed a pair of silver stags in the bowl, as if he were a penitent making an offering. The man looked up. He had eyes the color of old straw, and a beard like a broom. "Do you come to hear of mercy, my lord?" he asked, not recognizing a prince and not needing to. "I come to hear of arithmetic," Oberyn said. "Of what happens when men have too much and others too little. Of how long a rope can bear men climbing it from both ends." "Not long," the sparrow said, "unless someone wraps it around a beam." "Wrap your rope around the beam that does not splinter," Oberyn said. "If the queen offers you swords, remember how swords talk. They speak quickly," the man said, and his smile was small and wry. "And they speak always at the end." "Just so," Oberyn said, and went on. Varys waited for him in the cloister where they had spoken before. The eunuch had a meager sprig of mint between thumb and forefinger, and crushed it idly to scent his own soft skin. "The Golden Company is buying grain," he said conversationally. "That in itself would not trouble me. Mercenaries must eat. They are also buying ores." "Nine. Ores are appetite," Oberyn said. "They are not a plan. Plans are best kept thin and fed often," Varys said. "You have made the queen look foolish by asking for a skull. She does not like to be asked for anything. She is considering asking the faith for soldiers to make up for the men she fears, will not follow her finger now that it has no father behind it." "Nam? Give a man the habit of forgiveness, and he will sell it for a habit of punishment," Oberyn said. "If she arms the faith, she will discover that swords in hands that pray cut prayers into flesh." "I had thought you might prefer it," Varys murmured. "A new chaos favors new names. Chaos that devours women and children is not the chaos I sell," Oberyn said. "I will make her pay if she does it. But I will not invite her to do it to give myself the pleasure of a reckoning." Varys closed his eyes briefly, as if savoring a sweetness too rich to eat quickly. "You are a rare man here, Prince." "I am a common man elsewhere," Oberyn said. "In Braavos, there are 100 in every alley who know a blade is only a tongue." "Then speak with yours," Varys said. "The queen is calling her banners to talk. If your voice is among them, she will hear it as sand in her teeth. That has a way of making people swallow carefully." The queen called, and he went, because he had decided to be present for the hour when she set fire to her own hem. The council chamber was full of the false heat of men who thought themselves iron. Cersei announced that a new high septon would be chosen with the crown's blessing, and that the faith would be reminded of the debt owed it from the days of the dragons. She said reminded as if it meant forgotten, and repaid as if it meant armed. When she had finished, Oberyn asked for bread to be sent to the steps of the sept and coin to be given to the sisters, whose sleeves were always clean, because their hands were always busy with the dirt of other people's floors. "We are not a pantry," Cersei snapped. "You are a queen," Oberyn said. "Queens are pantries while they are loved and racks when they are not. You may choose which you prefer to be thought." "Them?" Her eyes flashed. "You forget yourself." "I remember myself," he said. "For years I forgot. I remembered Elia and thought that was enough. It is not." Menderol. Afterward, in a gallery that gave upon a small garden where the keep attempted to pretend it had been built anywhere other than upon a city's back, Margaery stood among lemon trees that would never fruit and plucked a leaf, and bruised it between fingers. The scent she made was not Dornish, and yet it was close enough to make Oberyn think of home. She will turn the faith into a cudgel, she said, voice low. Then she will point it at me. She will, Oberyn agreed. What would you do if you were me? She asked. I would marry the king quickly and make the realm love me as if I had baked bread for each of them with my own hands, he said. Then I would go to my bedchamber door each night with a septa and a scribe and a serving girl, and I would make them look at my sheets the way cats look at a mouse hole, so that when your enemies whisper lewd stories into the dark, there will be too many eyes to make a convincing liar. She smiled, genuinely then, and it made her seem a little less perfectly arranged. If I could have you as a lady-in-waiting, I should feel safer. I am ill at pouring wine, he said, but I can teach the women who pour yours to count and to remember. Dough, she said. Olenna will find coin we did not know we had for that. He taught. In a low room by the mews, he sat with half a dozen girls and a motherly widow and drew numbers on slate until the girls exchanged glances that meant they were pleased to be trusted with the smallest part of power. He taught them to write in small, neat hands dates and names, and the count of cups brought in, and cups taken out. The names of the men who stood guard, and whether they stood or leaned. He taught them to whisper to one another as if they were men. He taught them to look. He told them not to guess. They learned quickly, because women always do when men tell them they need not know. Ellaria watched and said nothing until they had gone. Then she touched his shoulder. If you cannot stop the queen's folly, she said softly, you will build a bridge out of it. Bridges are useful, he said. They are, she agreed. But stand in the middle of one too long, and you will be the first to fall when it does. He kissed her palm and tasted lemon and dust. News went out like surge lines in a storm. In the Riverlands, men spoke of a lady whose throat was a mouth that told only one story. In the Vale, a feathered serpent of gossip slid from roost to roost, trailing the name of a girl with dyed hair, who had learned to call herself by another. In the North, winter took and gave and took again, and a boy with a crown of thorns he had not asked to wear bled for a fortress of snow. In the East, the screaming of men under the banners of harpies grew hoarse. Sails were counted. Names were polished. A man who called himself Griff, and whose eyes were coins of old mintage, sat a little straighter on a river ship, and took a second measure of his own courage. Illyrio and Pentos smiled to himself, and added a dish to a table that had already groaned. Oberyn received a letter from a woman in Lys, whose bed had often been arguments, and whose eyes never had. She wrote of a youth with the gait of someone who had been taught grace like a language and not born with it. She wrote of sellswords hired without too much haggling, and of a company that had broken its own oath with a careful hand as one breaks a crust baked too hard. He read it, rolled it into his head, and burned it over a candle whose fat had flickered in a draught. He breathed the smoke and made decisions. He went to the queen again, because he had decided he would never allow her to stop looking at him. You will not arm the faith, he said without ceremony. I will do as I please, she replied, and the pleasure was hatred. You will not, he said, taking 3 steps into her chamber so that her guards must either seize him and cause a scandal or let him stand and risk the appearance of intimacy. You will not because you require the Tyrells, and the Tyrells require a city that does not feed upon itself. You will not because you require Dorne, and Dorne will not suffer men with 7-pointed stars to judge us in our beds. You will not because you require ships, and the men who sail them will not carry priests with pikes. None? She laughed, sharp and small. I require nothing. I am the regent. I will make the city what it should be. You will make it what you are, he said. Do better than that. He turned then, because the line had been drawn, and there was no profit in standing around admiring its neatness. She did not heed him. She armed the faith by writing on a parchment with a hand that did not shake. The high septon elected by frightened men bowed his head and accepted swords as if accepting bread for starving children. Barefoot men took up steel and held it with unfamiliar fingers that tightened quickly. The small folk cheered because they mistook power that had borrowed their hunger for power that grew from it. The first night, a man who had made his living selling bad maps of the city was whipped for blasphemy. The second, 3 whores were dragged naked before a shrine and told to spit on their own names. On the third, a brother of the gold cloaks who had made a joke about a statue found his teeth on the cobbles and blood on his shirt. Information has a way of traveling. Soon enough, it arrived at the queen's door as praise. Oberyn received in the same span a note from Varys that contained no words, only a small scrap of velvet with a lion embroidered badly on it. He smiled at that and did not bother to burn it. Some ash is not worth the breath. He went into the city with 2 men and no banners, and stood on the steps of a small sept at dusk and listened to the prayers. When the men with stars on their cloaks came with cudgels to clear the steps, he did not move. Their captain recognized him a heartbeat too late. "You cannot stand here, my lord," the man said, uncertain whether to call him my lord or my enemy. "I can," Oberyn said pleasantly, "and do. You cannot beat women for touches made in houses where coin buys nothing, only company. If you wish to discuss the theology of flesh, we can do so in the light. I will bring a healer and a butcher. Both know more of bodies than you." The man turned purple and made the mistake of lifting his hand. Oberyn caught his wrist with the spear's shaft lifted crosswise and levered gently until the man sank to his knees with a mule he could not quite smother. He released him at once. "Do not mistake patience for cowardice," he said quietly to all of them. "The first teaches men to breathe. The second makes them stop. Choose which you prefer to encourage in this city." Men of Martell. They did not answer him. They would not, until someone had taught them how to speak in another man's presence without shame. He turned and left because surrendering the last word can be more lordly than keeping it. When he returned to the keep, Jaime waited with a face set for the inevitable argument. "You will not fight the queen's priests in the street," the kingslayer said, trying the words for a fit he already knew was wrong. "I will not," Oberyn agreed. "I will talk to them in the street. There is a difference. You must learn the differences between things quickly now. Your sister has not." Jaime's laugh was low and tired. "She never has. And yet she always believed herself a scholar at the School of Power." "Then she will learn anatomy in the end," Oberyn said. "When the thing cuts." Elaria lay awake that night tracing patterns on his chest that resembled the maps Doran loved. "I have a picture in my mind," she said. "It is of a girl with hair the color of a new coin riding something that should not exist, with a city burning beneath her and men cheering, because they do not know what else to do when there is so much light." "Keep the picture," he murmured. "It will be useful." He watched the window grow pale around its edges and listened to the city gather itself up for morning. Even grief must sleep, and fear cannot run all night. In Sunspear, under a sky as hot as a held breath, Ariohota and Arianne watched Tristane and Myrcella drift their Savas pieces and fail to hurt one another, which is a kind of skill rare in princes. Doran read a letter with a face that refused to be read. When he finished, he tapped a finger against the arm of his chair where the wood had been worn soft by thought. "Quentin," he said again, but this time the word had weight. "It is time." Arianne's eyes flashed, betrayal and relief twin lights in them. "You will send him," she said. "You will send him and not me." "I will send him," Doran said, "because you would make a story of it, and I need no story yet. I need a beginning that looks like a mistake until it is not." He raised his eyes to his daughters. "Your time will come. It will be noisy as a market day, and everyone will think they set their prices high until you go home with more than coin." "Nain." She smiled then with her father's patience and her mother's mouth. "I will hold you to that, Papa," she said. Then, with the quick change of weather, she had always had as a child, she knelt beside Myrcella and moved a piece that lost her a dragon and gained her a ship, and laughed when the girl frowned, and then laughed too. A ship at Planky Town took on water and 2 young men with new beards and old names. South of Volantis, a dragon chased goats. In Pentos, a fat man adjusted rings and told himself he had left the water to boil, but it would not boil over because he was watching. In King's Landing, the queen signed a paper giving criminals to holy men. In the Riverlands, a woman with a throat not meant for breath taught men whose faces she could not see to say certain names. The realm moved, as realms do, like a hill with a slow-limbed beast inside it, a shape that was not the ground itself and could not be seen except in the way the grasses bowed. Oberyn went again to the yard at dawn and moved the spear until the ash talked back. He thought of his brother's line about rocks and tide. He thought of the boy Griff and the girl Daenerys, and of how men make gods out of people when they are tired of the ones they had. He thought of the queen and her new swords in old hands, and of Tywin's skull cruising south in a padded box like a final ridiculous envoy. He thought of Elia until he did not need to think of her, because she was there like air. He had never been content, and he was not now. But he had come to something like its cousin, the feeling one has when the day's labor is exactly the size of the day, and no larger. He would press in the small spaces, and when the door had softened he would put his heel to it, and it would break the way things break when a man has waited close enough and long enough to hear the grain surrender. Toward noon, a boy sent by no one in particular, and by everyone who knew the road, ran breathless to say that a barefoot swarm had filled the steps of Baelor's and sung a hymn with fists clenched. Toward evening, word came that a barge on the river had flown a banner with a crown on black, and that the crew had been drunk with their own boldness and not with wine. The city lurched like a drunkard who has found another cup. The queen ordered more men to the steps and more wine to her table. The Tyrells sent barley. The sisters carried bodies and prayers both. The ravens flew until their wings begged them to rest, and then flew some more. In the deep of that night, when the candle he read by had wept itself into a low, stubborn flame, he heard a sound at the door that was not a knock and not a scrape, but something like the breath a man makes when he means to be a ghost and cannot. He opened to find a courier with a face as gray as bad weather, thrusting a folded parchment with the seal already cracked. It was 3 lines in Doran's hand, without greeting or signature. The first said that the skull was the skull. The second said that Quentyn had gone to make a folly into a crown. The third said, "Be certain that when the snakes strike, they strike together." He held it and thought of Oberyn's impatience, Tyeni's sweet poison, Nymeria's cool hunger. He thought of Sorella playing a game no man had taught her. He thought of the younger ones with their knees still scabbed and their lips still sticky with stolen jam. He thought of himself as a boy, and the first time the spear had felt exactly the right weight in his hand, and of Elia placing a hand on his head in benediction, and of the taste of lemons. "I will be certain," he said to the empty room. "I will make them a fist." The city slept, or tried to. Dreams went about their work, unpicking what the day had done and braiding it into new shapes for the morning. The moon lay white on the blade of his spear where it stood by the bed like a faithful dog. Ellaria turned toward him in sleep, and he drew the sheet over her shoulder and lay on his side and waited for morning. Because he had work, and because the door liked to be tested at first light, he woke to thunder. That was only the city beginning the day. He rose and drank water and chewed mint, as always. He put on plain clothes that would not snag and tied his hair close. He set the spear across his back. At the threshold he paused and looked once more at the shape the night had made of the room. 2 cups, one emptied of wine, the other of water, a plate with the crusts of bread he had saved and not eaten after all, a line of ash on the sill where a moth had died. He stepped out into the hall, and into the day, and into the work, as if into a river he had tested 1,000 times, and found deep enough to swim. And still, as he walked, he said her name once under his breath, because a man who builds a bridge lays the first stone in his own mouth, and carries it there until he reaches the other side. "Elia," he said, and the word did not cut as it once had. It shaped. It measured. It made a path where none had been, which is all a name can do when the world means to be turned. Oh, K. Noise wore a shape that morning. It went down the hill as if the city had been poured. A slow move of carts and men and wives, and very small boys with hems in their mouths, and Oberyn rode into it with Ellaria beside him, and the spear slung where it had always been. The gold cloaks were out at every gate. their armor mottled with rust where lords' eyes seldom fell. Ribbons of cloth had been tied to half a dozen pikes, scraps of blue and green and yellow taken from shawls or curtains, or a dead man's sleeve, and the scraps twitched in the river breeze like fish still alive enough to remember swimming. He had answered Doran in 3 lines of his own. "We will strike only with a purpose. The skull is a stone removed. The water will move around it. Quentin will need patience for heat." Elaria watched him sand the letters with the blotting dust she carried in a little horn, and had said nothing. He loved her silence when silence was a craft. The queen had set a bounty, and dwarfs had begun to die. It came in the way small cruelties come. First spoken as a jest in a wine-sour room, then written with an officious hand on a poster, nailed to a post, then read out by a boy with a broken shoe, then tucked neatly into the mouths of men who liked permission. "By the grace of her grace," the first placard said, and Oberyn had laughed aloud at that. Grace has no grace that needs announcing. Before he felt the heat rise in him and did not laugh anymore. The first head he saw was not even a dwarf's. A tanner's apprentice no higher than Oberyn's elbow had been born narrow at the hips and broad at the shoulder, with a neck that looked like a knot in a rope. He had carried Smallfoot's wages and been set upon for it, and the man who did it had brought his whimpering prize to a guardhouse to trade for gold. The head looked wrong on the table, too long and not round enough. A good tavern would have thrown the roast out for spite. The gold cloak at the desk had counted out coin anyway, flinching only when Oberyn put his spear point through the purse's leather and spilled the coins like pale fish onto the desk. "That bounty is void," he said low enough that the men would have to lean in to be angry with him. "Her Grace may collect excuses as she pleases in her rooms. Not here. Not in the street." The gold cloak squared himself to indignation and found it too big for his mouth. Oberyn called for the captain and saw the man blanch the color of milk left out in sun. "Your seal is on that scrap," he said, tapping the poster. "You will remove every one of these and replace them with a list of thieves hung yesterday for beating smallfolk, and a list of thieves who will be hung tomorrow for the same. I will take the counterfeit head to the sept, and we will light candles for the boy whose wages were stolen and for the man who sold him. We will pray for him also, because gods prefer the hard prayers." He did not wait for assent. He did not ask for permission. They walked to Baylor's with the poor, carrying a head they had not asked to carry and grief they had never agreed to wear. And the women at the steps took the head without flinching and wrapped it in linen as if it were nothing but a loaf. And the barefoot preacher spoke his small warm words again. And for a little while the city remembered that days could be mended with thread and not only with knives. By noon he was in a different room, where light never reached the back corners and coin reached too easily across the table, and 3 kettle-black brothers sat with their mouths not quite closed around smiles, and a lord who had never learned to lower his voice was announcing to them how very much he disliked being made to wait outside the queen's bedchamber to deliver messages. Sir Osney's grin had a laziness in it that meant he had never worked a day in his life at anything he could not undress. "If she wants a singer in scandal," he said, half boast and half complaint, "I can be music." "Music requires ear," Oberyn said, stepping from the shadow as one steps into a bath. "Your sort prefer drums." He set a wine cup down in front of Osney and another before his brother, and when they reached for them, he took both away again and drank from neither, smiling. If a man wished to ruin a girl with a hymn, he would want the words to be memorized by a man with a better face and a worse soul. He let the words lie with their own bait and their own hook. The kettle-black's eyes flicked. Osfrid toward the door. Osmond toward his sword. Osney only toward the coin. "Who are you?" Osfrid demanded, because there is always one man who believes names do work on rooms. Oberyn laughed and bowed extravagantly, the quality of the bow making it an insult. "A man who will flog you if you touch a septa with your tongue," he said cheerfully, and left them looking long for the line between jest and promise, and not finding it. He told Margaery later, with 2 of her cousins playing at Savas on the floor nearby, what men she should have watched. Not the priests themselves, but the couriers at the door, the guards posted at odd hours, the singers always the singers. Ask the girl who pours for them how many cups leave the room full and come back empty, he said. The numbers will tell you when to expect an accusation before the accuser does. Then send a boy with clean hands and quick feet to stand at that door when the hour comes, and let him count who goes in and who comes out. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at him with a frankness that made her beauty less of a mask and more of an instrument. I do not know whether to be grateful to you or to be afraid of you, she said. Be both, he said. It will make you careful. She was careful. When the queen loosed her kettle black with his rehearsed sins, there were already 4 girls who had counted the days, and 2 knights of the Rainbow Guard who had not meant to be anywhere near any of it, and yet somehow were, and the accusation slid about the room looking for purchase and found none. The septa who was meant to be shocked had somehow mislaid her shock. The scribe who was meant to write had broken her quill and had to go fetch another, and by the time she returned, Osney's face had learned that invention is more difficult than it looks. The queen raged later and called the Tyrell girl sly, and Oberyn inclined his head as if he had given a tincture that had not taken, and Oberyn listened to the gossip settle like ash over the keep and saw how easily a thing can be undone if it is done before it begins. It did not save others. That afternoon, 3 whores were shaved publicly for refusing to kneel to a man whose hands were softer than theirs. And that night, a butcher who had told a jape about stars was dragged into a lane and taught the old truth that men with new power practice hardest. Oberyn did not exhaust himself on every street. He is not a man who pretends to be water and flood all things. He is a man who carries a skin and knows it empties. He picked instead the one he would save that day, and saved it with numbers as much as steel. 12 coins into the hands of a woman whose rent had been doubled for the sin of living. 3 men flogged for the same and set to clean the gutters outside the sept they had used as pretext. Names written down in a neat list and slipped into a basket a sparrow carried. When he was too tired to choose, he sat with Gendry in the smithy that lived a street and a half off the street of steel and watched the boy hammer iron into shapes that worked. You have a good ear, he said over the ring of metal. You can hear where the steel wishes to go. I hear where it won't, the boy said without looking up. It tells me no, and I ask it for yes a different way. Teach your men that, Oberyn said. Teach them clubs that do not break wrists when you hit bone. Teach them how to fall with knees and not with faces. You will make fewer corpses that way. Gendry blew hair from his eyes. Why should I teach men who will never pay? Because you will like the sound of your own hammer and 20 years better if you do, Oberyn said. And because I will pay you enough now that you will not have to count to 20 to know what good you have done. He left coin. He left a promise. He left, as he has always left when he meant to return. The smell of lemons where men had expected only dust. Jaime came to him with a map in his eyes and the weariness of a man who has explained himself to himself and found the explanation serviceable and still something less than comfort. The Riverlands, he said, in the tone of a man telling his own hand where they will be going tomorrow, whether they like it or not. Riverrun, then the rest. The phrase have tied knots all through the place. Someone must pick at them with a civilized finger. You will be that finger, Oberyn said. He did not make a jest about hands. Jaime had learned too many of those already from other mouths. He walked with him through the lower yard to where the Lannister household had arranged itself around horses and mules, wagons and boys. Carts always look like war, even when they are carrying only flour. Do not answer your sister's letters, Oberyn said, as if he were advising a boy not to scratch a healing scab. She will send no letter that does not feel like a command. Jaime said lightly. I will open them and let the commands blow out like smoke. He turned, smiling with his mouth and with a hard place at the back of his eyes. Do you know, Martell, that when I was a boy, I thought men like you were invented for the sake of stories. Not because of your poisons or your women, because you do not stay where you are put. That is the only reason to be a man, Oberyn said. Send me word when you reach the river. Send me the name of the first Frey you make weep. I will send you his tears in a bottle, Jaime said. And they laughed. And the laughter did not make them friends, but it made them slightly less alone in a city that had a way of making even crowded rooms lonely. In Sunspear, Ser Balon Swan rode through the shadow of the old palace's walls, with his white cloak dusty, and his face set for a mission that had been meant to be honor, and had turned halfway across the desert into a burden. The skull went before him in a chest on a mule who did not care at all for honor. Ariohota met him at the gate with courtesy that had nothing to do with warmth, and brought him to the water gardens, because Doran had insisted the skull see children, not just lords. The pools made Leaflight dance on the silk that wrapped what had once been a face. The prince's hands trembled when he touched the silk, and the tremor had nothing of palsy in it. It was something that lives beneath words. "Your Grace," Ser Balon said to Myrcella, when he had bowed rigidly to Doran and to Arianne, and to every carved orange in the place. "I bring you the respects of the king." "My brother's respects," Myrcella said, with a careful dignity that had learned quickly from watching adults bend themselves into shapes they could not maintain. "My uncle's," she asked then. And when Doran's eyes flickered to her, she smiled bravely and moved her Savas knight with a lift of hand that made Tristane glance up at her mouth and look away again, embarrassed by his own devotion. Ser Balon did not answer. Silence does a lot of work in rooms like this. Arianne watched him like a cat that had already eaten and was deciding which mouse to toy with next. Later, in a cool corridor where the wet stone made her ankles feel the way she had liked to pretend the air of the summer sea felt when she was a girl. She let her hand fall on Ser Balon's arm and slowed him with nothing but quiet. "In Dorne," she said, "we value frankness because it saves time. In King's Landing, men value other arts. Tell me which you prefer, sir." "Then," he smiled the way a man smiles to hide chapped lips, "I prefer to return alive. You will." She said, "But not with the story you were sent to gather. We will make you a new one to carry. You may decide whether it is heavier or lighter than the one you came with." She moved away then, and left him with his honor and his skull, and the knowledge that both were objects other people were going to set on tables and move like pieces. When Ario wrote to Oberyn to say the skull had been measured and matched, and placed in a room where sun fell on it each day for an hour, the letter smelled faintly of oranges and of his own patience. Oberyn held the words a while before letting them go. He went down alone into the belly of the Red Keep, and found Qyburn among jars that had once held fruit, and now held stranger preserves. "There is a rumor," Oberyn said, "that you intend to make knights from pieces." "There is a rumor," Qyburn replied, smiling as if at a child who had gotten a riddle partly right, "that you intend to make peace from knives. We are both men of conundrum." "Do not make any man from Gregor's body," Oberyn said idly, looking at shelves as if they had been a wardrobe in a whorehouse. "I would find that discourteous. His body is heavy and of little conversational interest," Qyburn murmured. "It has already done everything it intended to do in this world. I prefer raw materials that have not yet had their chance for novelty. There will be novelty enough when the faith demands trial by combat of queens," Oberyn said. He watched the man's hands. Qyburn's fingers moved in tandem when he thought, left and right mirroring, as if the man had taught them to move like that, to comfort himself every time someone with a chain had once raised a hand to scold him. "Make whatever suits your sense of the grotesque. Only remember that some things are better done behind 3 doors and 2 guards, and some are better not done. You will know the difference because I am telling you to know it." "Da." Qyburn inclined his head like a man bowing to a cat. "I will keep your opinion with my others," he said, and Oberyn left him to the preserving of the Queen's faith in strange sciences. At court, the Queen replaced names with names. Harry Swift took a chair he could not fill. Qyburn took whispers into jars and poured them out again in other ears with the skill of a vintner, telling each man what he wished to drink. Pycelle trembled on cue. The Tyrells kept their smiles in a bowl. Kevin Lannister left at last, anger and worry chasing each other across his face, as if they were children who could not decide whether to be brothers or enemies. He kissed Tommen's brow with a sincerity that surprised no one more than himself. "You will send for me," he said, and the boy nodded because he had been taught. Nods were a language. Cersei watched her uncle go with satisfaction, having mistaken the removal of the only hand steady enough to guide her for victory. A raven from the Riverlands brought Oberyn a bit of ribbon that had once been white and been dragged through mud and then through cleaner water and was now the color of honesty. Jaime was doing work. The work of a man who had discovered that his best blade was not the one on his hip. Oberyn sent back a slice of lemon candied in sugar with a note pinned to it that said, simply, "Remember sweet things even when they cut." He imagined Jaime's face when he unwrapped it, the way a man looks when he is surprised twice in the same breath. Daros sang. The streets murmured. Dwarf heads stopped arriving at the gates quite so often, though once each week someone still thought to bring one in, as if tradition could be saved from foolishness by repetition. Oberyn had the offending poster pulled down at the last gate, as if it had been a tapestry hung too low, and gave the boy who had nailed it up a coin and a suggestion for a more profitable trade. "Sell lemons," he said, "and count the seeds as you eat them. If the number is odd, keep your mouth shut the rest of the day. If it is even, you can sing." The boy laughed and ran. It pleased Oberyn more than he would have admitted to watch the boy run without fear. At night he would lie with Ilaria and let the weight of the day drain through him, into the mattress as water drains through sand. She would ask him nothing that could not be answered with his hands. When they spoke, it was of numbers again. 3, she said, trailing her finger along his ribs. "A queen, a girl, a boy across the sea. Which is the stone you will throw first?" "The boy is a stone that throws itself," he said. "The queen is a stone that insists she is a bird. The girl is a fruit, which is not a stone at all. But bite the wrong fruit, and you will think it is. Daddy Nawal. You will make a stew," she said sleepily. "You will feed too many men, and half will be ungrateful, and you will still cook. I will wash the pot." He dreamed of Elia sometimes. He did not dream of the moment of ruin. He had not been there to see it, and even his cruelest mind would not invent it to punish him. He dreamed of smaller things the mind keeps when it cannot keep the whole. The way she had held a book with her forefinger through the pages like a thin spine. The way she had sighed when a child's hair refused to comb. The way she had looked up when a gull cried and said, "For no reason at all. It is as if the sea were a door." He woke from those dreams with a softness in him that he would not have traded away for 1,000 sharpnesses. Arianne wrote to him with words that had been dipped in a river and not yet dried. She wrote of Quentyn departing, of how the boy had walked like a man learning how to be a man while men watched. She wrote of Myrcella's eyes following Tristane's hand across the Cyvasse board, of the way the boy had learned to lose with grace, because losing to delight is better than beating it. She wrote of her own hunger and called it by a brave name, ambition, and then in the next line called it by its truer name, impatience. "I can make a queen with my 2 hands." She wrote, "and the world will be less foolish for it." He wrote back on a smaller page with only this: "If you make a queen too early, the crown will crush her. If you want it to fit, measure twice." She did not answer him, which was an answer. He sent another letter, this time to Doran. "Watch the step where the stair turns. He will." Mist came to the city one morning and sat in the alleys, as if thinking whether to stay. Oberyn liked the way men look in mist. Tentative, cautious, faces stripped of the bravado they wear for one another, when they can see how far their words travel. In the white quiet, the rumor arrived almost gently. A sellsword company had bent its vows like reeds. A boy with pale eyes had set a course not for Marine but for a shore, tracked with old storms. A fat man in Pentos had needled his cooks to make 2 desserts where one would do. He sent a note to Varys. When men who have never seen the Stormlands say the word griffin with such loving mouths, "I begin to believe there is a young hawk." Varys returned 2 words in a sprig of thyme: "He is." "Will you back him?" Ilaria asked, playing idly with a scar on his thigh that had the shape of a bent moon. "I will back the wind," Oberyn said, "until I hear which way it blows for Dorne. The rest is sentiment." Sentiment is useful but bad as bread. He thought of a boy with eyes like old coins, and of a girl with hair like new ones, and he felt the slight inconvenience of hope lift his skin. Hope is inconvenient because it gets in the way of the blade. He sharpened the blade anyway. A man can be inconvenienced and sharp at once. The queen held court with fire in her hair and water in her voice. She signed a writ arming holy men to keep fear tidy. She let Oberyn whisper that a knight had been made from vows so sacred that his tongue had cleaved to them entirely. He will fight for me. She said it in triumph to no one, and Oberyn saw in the faces of the men around her the poor fool's comfort that comes when a woman announces her own salvation with such gaiety that they need not contest it. He did not go down among the vaults to seek the giant whose head had been shipped south. He had seen enough of men made into sums by other men. When a ship slipped into Blackwater Bay with sails the color of a cloud thinned by light, and men on the quays began saying a name with an old sadness brightening it, Conington Oberyn walked to the edge of the city and watched the water. The quays crowded as they always do for arrivals. Relatives and creditors and lovers and men who make a living selling lies about foreign lands to those who have never left home. A girl with hair like wet walnut shells cried for a cousin who did not come off when the gangplank dropped. 3 boys compared their crab scars. A man with a scar that had once been a smile said cruel things in a careful voice, because cruelty felt like certainty to him. Oberyn listened. He listened for the way a name shifts when it begins to be believed, the way people say it with less spit and more breath. He heard it. That night he wrote to Doran what he had heard, and what he guessed from what he had heard, and what he would do with the guesses. He wrote also to Arianne and told her a story that was true, of a time in Tyrosh when he had seen a troupe of actors stitch 2 tales together, one about a prince who had been lost and found, and another about a girl whose father had made a door for her to walk through. The joining had been clumsy and then beautiful, as if the clumsiness had been required to teach the beauty how to sit. He told his niece, "This is one of those plays. Wait until the actors decide who is protagonist. Do not push them on their cue." She did not reply. He imagined her reading the letter with her mouth bitten, the way she bit her mouth when she wanted to laugh and knew she should not. He slept badly again, and the next day the city rewarded him for his patience with a simple thing. A woman whose child had been taken by a press gang found her boy again at the quayside, and the way she made to take his face between her hands made Oberyn glad to have lived long enough to watch it. The boy squirmed and pretended he did not want the touching. The mother scolded him for pretending, which is a kind of forgiveness. When Cersei's list of suspects for the queen's imagined lusts grew long enough to slap the table when she read them out, Oberyn excused himself from the council with a politeness so elaborate that it could not be called insult and went to the yard to move the spear until his hands remembered there were activities in this world that asked nothing of a man but his body and his breath. He thought of Quentyn riding toward a woman who kept monsters as casually as other women keep birds. He thought of the boy's sensible mouth and of the way sense breaks when it is heated too quickly. He thought of Doran's ankle wrapped in linen against the swellings that the heat made worse. He thought of the sand snakes, Obara with her impatience, Tiny with her soft knives, Nymeria with her cool mind, and he thought of Sorella, who had put the world on as a coat and gone to see how it fit in Old Town's libraries, and he smiled because he loved them and because he had never wanted daughters and had gotten them anyway and found himself altered for the better. Evening brought a visitor he had not planned. Littlefinger came back to the city, or a letter came bearing his hand, and his habit of handling words as if they were coins, turning and weighing and biting. The letter was all compliments and no information, which is another way of selling information. Oberyn folded it and slid it under a dish, and let it sit there overnight. In the morning he wrote a reply that said frankly, "If you intend to put a crown on Sansa Stark, do it in the open. If you intend to put one on your own cleverness, do it in the dark where no one will see you fail." He sealed it with plain wax, and did not send it for 3 days, then burned it and wrote another that said nothing at all. The faith drew blood from a man who had kissed another in a doorway. The man who had kissed him ran and left his love bleeding, because fear teaches us to betray. And afterward, he took refuge in a pot shop, where Oberyn had eaten stewed eels the week before. The prince went there for eels again, and found the man inside with his face turned to the wall, as if he could make himself vanish by addressing the plaster. Oberyn sat, and ate, and paid, and left a coin for the man with the whisper that he had been brave to kiss, knowing men would hate him for it. When he stepped back into the lane, the air smelled like rain, and like the moment before rain. The two smells always slightly different. He looked up. The sky had decided on storm. The city paused in that half-breath. Cities take when they realize they will be wet and cannot stop it. He stood in the rain until he was soaked and laughed, because water is a way the world insists we are not in charge of it. Ellaria came to the door and looked at him and shook her head, and then came out and stood with him, and then began to dance, stamping and throwing her arms as if the rain were music. That word again, music, and after a moment 2 of the sand snakes came and joined her, and servants leaned from windows and clapped, and a boy from the kitchens banged a pot with a spoon out of time. The spear leaned against the wall under the eaves, beaded with drops. For a time he was simply wet, and a man, and not a creature of vengeance or of politics. The rain ran down his back and into his waistband, and he grinned at the discomfort, because even discomfort was proof he had not yet turned himself wholly to a blade. The storm passed. They dried themselves and drank wine and ate bread spread with a paste of olives and garlic that tasted like truth. In the middle of the night he woke and listened to Ellaria sleep and to the keep's deep sounds, and heard a footfall in the hall that he knew belonged to no one on his side. He became breath and quiet. The step moved on. The city exhaled. Dawn brought a letter with a seal that had been cracked and resealed at least once. Doran had written in his neat, measured hand, "The boy will land in the storm. He will need names that do not tremble when spoken. Decide which you will give him. Decide which you will take back if he offends." Oberyn sat with the words until the ink seemed to breathe. He thought of the Marcher lords and their long memories, of the men of the Stormlands and their short ones, of what a griffin could reasonably claim and what dragons could. He thought of Trystane and Myrcella playing under Orange shadows, and of what his daughters would say if he gave away all the game to a boy with a coin's eyes. He went to the Tyrells and asked the old woman for bread and truth, and she gave him the first and what passed for the second in her tongue. He went to the small folk and asked for lists, and they gave him names of men who had hurt them. He went to the Sept and asked the barefoot preacher for forgiveness he did not need, and the man gave him a piece of advice instead: walk slow through a crowd that wishes to love you. The sparrow said softly, they will pull at you until you are threadbare. He walked slow. He counted. He watched. When word came that a golden boy had put his hand on a land and named it his, the sound that moved through King's Landing was not surprise so much as relief. Men love a banner that describes a shape they believe they recognize. It makes the world smaller. Cersei made the world smaller too by shouting at it. Traitors, she said, loving the taste of the word. We will teach them what treason costs. She sent men to speak to other men who did not respect her finger. She drank. She whispered to her silent knight, and he did not whisper back. Margaery bent over a child in a poorhouse and learned the names of a dozen mothers and the name of the girl's cat. Oberyn watched her and decided once more that there are forms of bravery more cunning than the one sung of. He taught 3 more girls to count the cups. Jaime's next ribbon came stained with wine and something darker. He had taken Edmure Tully guestwise from Riverrun and had used courtesy as the door through which he led him to obedience. Oberyn shook his head at the elegance and the necessity both together and sent back a strip of lemon peel sugared. He began to like the game more than was healthy. He felt the city tilt one afternoon. Felt it the way a boatman feels a shift not of wind but of men moving to one side of the deck. He did not yet know what had moved. He learned at sunset, when a child with hair, the color of bread crust, brought him a scrap of parchment with a blot of ink and the words, "The Queen has sought the faith to unmake the youngest griffin by prayer." He laughed aloud. "She will try to pray a tide back into the sea," he said to Ellaria. "The tide will take her." Ellaria kissed the soft inside of his wrist. "Do not mistake tides for justice," she said. "Men drown on both." "I do not," he said, because he had no more faith in justice than in miracles. He believed in weight. He believed in timing. He believed in a spear's flex and a mine's. Night drew its fringe up over the rooftops. Oberyn wrote 3 letters and sealed them and handed them to 3 different boys, and watched each boy vanish into a different slice of the city. He sat with the 4th letter half written and did not finish it, because sometimes a letter is a trap one sets for oneself. He lay down. He slept, and this time he did not dream of Elia, but of a field of wheat at dusk, and of fireflies, and of a boy chasing them with cupped hands and failing to hold them. And he woke with a smile, because even failure can be beautiful when it does not cost blood. In the morning, he led Ilaria beneath the orange-leafed walk before they broke their fast, and told her what he meant to do. "When the boy lands," he said, "I will ask him for one thing I know he cannot deny if he wishes to be more than a piece in someone's story. Not a bride. Not gold. A promise. Promises are easy." And plucked an orange, and squeezed its scent like a blessing into the air. "This one is not," he said. "It will hurt him to make it, and hurt him more to keep it. But if he can, and does, then I will know he is not just a sail stitched in a far country and pushed toward ours by men who love their own cleverness. I will know he is wind." "Done? And if he is not wind?" Ilaria asked. "Then I will turn my back to him," he said. He was not cruel when he said it. He was matter-of-fact, the way a man is matter-of-fact about the tide. "I will look east again and send our strength to fire. Or I will go home and teach our girls to read the sort of maps men never draw." She set her palm against his cheek. "Whatever you do," she murmured. "I will make a bed for you to sleep in after." He smiled into her hand. "That is the first promise that does not hurt," he said. The day wore on. The city made bargains with itself. The queen signed papers as if they were salves and did not read the labels. The High Septon found that swords weigh more than prayers, and yet thought perhaps he carried them because the gods had desired it of him. Various birds told him something with their wings. Gendry forged something that would not break. Margaery learned a child's cat was named Butter, because his coat had the color of churned fat, and because a child's mind likes names that make the mouth happy. Toward evening, thunder walked over the hills, and did not trouble to rain. Oberyn went to the yard because he always went there when he felt the world slow before it spun faster again. He planted the spear's butt, and leaned upon it, and pictured the door he had named in his heart. He pressed his heel against it. Not hard, not yet. He listened. Beyond, he thought he could hear a woman's voice. Not Elias, but someone who had waited as long as he had waited and would be as unsatisfied by triumph as he would be. Perhaps it was the realms. Perhaps it was merely his own patience made a sound by fatigue. He breathed and counted and thought about where the spear would go next when the door gave, as doors do. He did not think, even then, that the door might give not with a splinter, but with a hinge coming free, the whole frame swaying into his space and forcing him to leap aside. Few men plan for that. Fewer plan for the way the frame will catch their ankle, so that for a moment they are clumsy. He accepted the clumsiness the way he had accepted other small failures, by folding it into the artistry of his motion until it looked like part of the dance. Night fell. He slept without wanting to and woke before he intended to, as men do who are practicing being alive for longer than fate often allows. He rose and washed and ate, and when the first bell rang for the first prayer he was already in the street. He was there when the ragged column of sparrows turned a corner like a flock catching a new wind. He was there when a man in a breastplate, with 7 stars on it, lifted his staff as if it were a sword. He was there when a boy tripped and skinned his knee and a woman picked him up as if he were a loaf that had fallen. He was there when a city that had been holding its breath decided to exhale. He smiled without showing teeth and moved through it. He had always moved through it. He would keep moving until movement did not profit him anymore, and then he would teach someone else how to stand very still, so that other men would exhaust themselves and fall down. That also is a use for a spear. He thought of Adia once as the day rose. Then he thought of Myrcella, and of Tristane, and of a skull that saw sun for an hour. He thought of his brother's ankles wrapped in linen and of Ariane's mouth bitten against laughter. He thought of Quentin's sensible step, and of sense undone by wonder. He thought of a boy with old coin eyes and of sails trimmed for weathermen had not learned how to read. He thought of how a name changes the world when you say it in the open. He thought of saying his again, not as threat, but as weight. He said it under his breath and felt the day take its shape around the syllables, the way water takes the shape of a stone. Oberyn, he said, and the city, preoccupied with its own plans and perils, did not hear him. That was well. Names are tools. Tools are better for the hand that uses them than for the crowd that watches. He adjusted his grip on the spear and went in search of the next man who needed to learn how to breathe.